Hi tubers, I just finished this painting and I'm gonna send it off to an exhibition in my hometown, a home island, Kame. It's been an intense process, a lot of shapes and details. I'm particularly happy about this rose. For some reason, it just comes right out of the picture, and if you see here the blue and the reds and the greens and the pastels way I painted this gives it this extreme 3D effect on a distance. What I do when I paint is like on the bright parts I just paint thick, so the light hits that surface first and sends out light from it. It's like almost creating a sculpture or relief, and around it you have the primary colors that enhances that effect. Also paint very thick on a bright, you see here, bright and spots, and keeps it down in the shadows. To get these surfaces to kind of glide into each other is really time-consuming work. It's like, because you have to let the shades slide over into each other. There's a lot of people who are making the shadows too hard, and some places they can be hard, like here. They can be that, but you have to really know what you're doing. You can see here too. It's some plant that was in the window where the light came in and just hit her hair and the thigh. Yeah. Anyway, and the framing, very expensive framing, but I love nice frames. It keeps the pictures kind of stable. It's like it kind of holds them in a grip. It's like seeing a landscape through a window. And I know a lot of people don't use frames, but I really like having real nice framing. It's like almost giving the customer a piece of furniture with a painting. Yeah, I get a lot of nice feedback on my videos, and it makes me happy that people can learn something from them, get inspired. I really like this rose. Maybe I'm turning into an impressionist. I don't know. Anyway, so share my video with your friends. You can also add me as a friend on Facebook, or join my group or my pages, but if you're gonna add me on Facebook, please send me a personal message and tell me who you are, or you will be ignored, unless you're a really pretty girl. Yeah. Anyway, just joking. No, it wasn't really a joke. Anyway, so I beg you fine farewell, I guess. Okay, cool. Yeah. P.S. That means, yeah. There will be after this video, this ranting, there will be a video of the whole painting process with some documentaries about art and stuff as a background, in the background, and enjoy. Yeah.
was a painter of light. He lived and worked in Delft, in the heart of the Netherlands. But little else is known about this artist. The names of his masters, the nature of his training, the period of his apprenticeship all remain mysteries. He left no letters, sketches, or drawings. We know only of his genius. His paintings have intrigued and fascinated viewers for centuries. The themes he chose to paint were those he encountered in daily life. A girl reading a letter in the center of a sunlit room. A figure at work. A woman pouring milk. A girl in a red hat, her lips parted, her eyes lit with expectation, looking at us. What is it that draws us in? Is it the poetry and power of the images, the use of reflected light, the saturation of color, the softness and yet brilliance of the image, or the sense of timelessness, its mystery and meaning? The celebration of ordinary tasks and daily life filled with quiet contemplation. The frozen moment in time, its intimacy and mood. A room filled with inner thoughts. Or is it simply the virtuosity of an extraordinary craftsman? What is it that makes a Vermeer a Vermeer?
There's a greater sense of light, I think, in Vermeer's painting than there is in anybody else's. And the light bathes the room. It lights on the figures. The figures seem to glow. Some of them seem to have a light almost within themselves. And there is this brilliant, brilliant use of light that nearly always comes through a window, which is on one side of the scene. One of the fascinating things I noticed is that you never see the outside. You never see a tree through the window. You only see the light coming through. But it is this light that is incredible. His use of this light playing on the various textures that he wants to portray, which have all their different meanings.
The supreme quality of Vermeer's light is the daylight effect. The clear daylight effect is extraordinary. Daylight permeates his shadows. And you see that so beautifully in The Milkmaid. As you look into that corner of the room where there's a wonderful still life of some kitchen implements, a brass pot and a wicker basket. You're seeing the whole thing, but you know it is in shadow. And one of the most beautiful things in the picture is the wall in back of her. And the gradations of light, or the intense light on the right side of the picture. And those gradations go from the most intense light to a darker light. But the shadows are transparent. There's always this clarity of form. The forms are never lost. There's another thing that's exciting about this picture. It begins to have a kind of pointillism. And if you look down at the loaves of bread, you have those solid forms, but in them he has these touches of light. He's broken his forms with these little points of light. And he uses that so effectively, and he uses it beautifully in the view of Delft. Those boats, which are in the lower right-hand corner there, those little touches of light, which means that the light bounces onto these dark forms. And it's wondrous to behold.
The Woman of the Balance is one of those supreme examples of Vermeer as an artist. Light coming in through the window gently illuminates the whole interior. It's a sort of a soft, deep, rich light. But it's wonderful to watch it happen, wonderful to watch it evolve. And Vermeer gives you the sense of light spilling across the interior of that space. It passes by that orange curtain. You can see how the light goes from behind that curtain, hits the wall directly, the gray of the wall, and then it passes through the thickest part of the curtain, and it's a deep, dark shadow at that point. And then as it hits the edge of the curtain, it creates a golden glow that links together the gray of the wall and the deepest part of the shadow as it comes into the room. And then the light passes down, illuminating the table, then the gold and the pearls on the table, coming across, caught by the edge of the table, and then your eye is drawn by her hand as it rests on the table, and you're brought back up to see her face, this wonderful, quiet, gentle face with her downcast eyes as she looks down at the balances she holds in her hand. Light draws you in and encompasses the full scope of the painting.
Harnessing light is central to the power of Vermeer. He transformed paint into light in the most brilliant and mesmerizing way.
He seduces us very quickly, Vermeer does. There's a magical quality to his work, beautiful and simple. But that's very deceptive. He's concentrating all the time. He adjusts reality. If you look at The Art of Painting, there's an artist at an easel, we see him from the back, and he's painting a woman, and she really represents history. And there's a map in the background, and the foreground is set so beautifully with the great carpet and the wonderful chandelier. All those details are ravishing. But where is the right leg of the easel? If you follow it down, you see the top of it, and you come down, and you see the artist is seated on a stool, and his foot is forward, but there's no leg of the easel. So where is that leg? If you look in that area where his leg is forward, and there are the two legs of the stool, if the leg of the easel came down there, it would confound that whole area. So he's either hidden it behind those two legs of the stool, or he's eliminated it completely. And if there's ever proof that Vermeer is not an ape of nature, he just doesn't paint what he sees, he makes adjustments. His pictures are so calculated. Carefully, you don't see the calculation, but I assure you, he has calculated his effects. He's concentrated. There's tremendous intelligence at work here, artistic intelligence.
Vermeer designs his paintings so brilliantly, so carefully, that every part of the painting, every drop of paint, every line, every nuance of colour has a deliberate meaning. A meaning in the composition, a meaning in the poetry, part of the story, whatever it is, everything has a meaning.
One of the most wonderful examples is the woman in blue reading a letter. It's this single figure who's standing in the corner of a room, and she's holding this letter. You can see the kind of emotional intensity of her experience, because just the way she clasps her arms by her side. But Vermeer locks that gesture into space by placing those hands right over the very strong horizontal bar that's the bottom of the map that hangs on the wall behind her. So this horizontal bar at the bottom creates this tense concentration on those hands. So the result is that you feel that nothing can move. Light also enters into this equation. While there are all these beautiful shadows and subtle shadow effects throughout the painting, she casts no shadow. By not casting a shadow, he somehow separates her out from time. The sense of passage of time that one senses with shadows, the moving of shadows, doesn't exist with her. So it enhances that whole sense of permanence. It's very hard with Vermeer to separate one thing from another because they're all so interwoven and interlocked. In the woman holding a balance, another example, it looks as though she will never move. It's in large part created by the gesture of the hand holding the balance, because that hand is locked in space by being juxtaposed over the vertical and horizontal elements of the frame. The little finger is extended horizontally, it just holds that hand in space, and then Vermeer reinforces that visual juxtaposition with a perspective. If you follow the perspective lines, go right back to that finger, that extended finger. The perspective of the table, of the mirror on the wall in front of her, all receded to that one point. So that vanishing point reinforces the importance of that gesture. And it's very interesting in Vermeer all the way through his career to see how he uses perspective, where he places the vanishing point, because the vanishing point tells us where he wants the eye to go.
An explanation of everything having a really serious part of the composition is in the woman with the balance. When I first examined that painting before the cleaning, the frame of the Last Judgment lying behind the woman was entirely black. In the X-radiograph you could see the frame on the right side of the painting, behind the woman's head, had two light lines coming down. These light lines show that there was a density there, a dense material which could have been white lead or lead tin yellow. Further examination showed that this frame had been overpainted by somebody, not by Vermeer, very much later, and that two gold lines, actually they were bright yellow, had been painted out and painted with a dark grey. When that overpaint was removed, the composition came to life, because you got on the right-hand side the two gold lines, you got on the left-hand side the light coming in and the gold-yellow curtain, and right in the centre is the gold little bit of her dress. And there are these three very, very important points, creating the strength of this composition with her holding the balance. Without the gold lines of the frame behind, the composition was just failing. It just didn't have the tension and the meaning that it now has. And that is a very good example of how every little thing in Vermeer's, every little point, every little mark has a meaning and has a purpose. Nothing's left to chance.
Vermeer's masterwork, The Music Lesson, clearly shows that nothing is left to chance. On the far side of a sunlit room, a woman stands playing a virginal. A man in elegant dress watches her and listens intently. Both figures are quiet, as though the music were measured and restrained. This is one of the most refined of Vermeer's works. He carefully calculated every aspect of its composition. The figures, the musical instruments, the mirror, table, tile patches and chairs, however realistically presented, are conceived as interlocking patterns of color and shape. Vermeer's placement of the vanishing point creates a dynamic and clear focus. It falls on the sunlit sleeve of the woman. A halo of reflected light and color emphasizes its importance. We can actually see the hole in the canvas left by the pin Vermeer used to construct the perspective of the painting. The power of this work grows out of Vermeer's use of linear perspective. The sharply receding wall on the left, coupled with the pronounced orthogonals of the window frame, leads the eye quickly to the woman. She becomes the fulcrum around which the painting revolves. Vermeer further compresses the space by filling the right side of the scene with a large tapestry-covered table. The angle of its receding edge transports us quickly back to the vanishing point. The floor also plays a significant role in the perspective construction. Its strong diagonal pattern leads us directly to the woman. The interlocking series of rectangular shapes surrounding the woman adds visual emphasis to her importance. Vermeer creates a strong vertical focus by placing the mirror directly above the lid of the virginal, so that the bottom edge of its frame is overlapped by the top edge of the lid. By including the woman's reflection in the mirror, he underscores her significance within the painting. The placement of the man and his relationship to the woman was of concern to Vermeer. Infrared analysis reveals that he first painted the man further forward and leaning more toward the woman. She likewise had a more active stance, her head twisted back in his direction. Vermeer subsequently altered the figures. The woman now stands directly facing the virginal. Seen from behind, her face is hidden from the viewer, but her image in the mirror was left as originally painted. He moved the man slightly, placing him in a more upright position. These adjustments were subtle but crucial. Vermeer transformed the figures from active poses to statuesque ones, emphasizing the permanence of their relationship. The effect brings them into harmony with the carefully ordered space. Vermeer uses color to strengthen the focus. The yellow-white of the woman's blouse, the golden color of the virginal, and matching reflected light on the back wall highlight the figures. The red of the woman's skirt, and Vermeer's selective use of black on the mirror, the virginal, the clothing of the two figures, and the pattern of the floor help lock our eye into place. The combination of overall contrasting colors, patterns, and shapes create major and minor accents focused on the theme of the painting. Vermeer preserves the privacy of the couple by creating an intimate space through the arrangement of objects on the right. The strategic placement of the chairs and the bass viol on the floor lock the couple into the background, protecting their private communication and separating them from us. The forward position of the table and the placement of the painting on the back wall reinforce their intimate space. By placing a chair directly between the table and the vanishing point, Vermeer interrupts the perspective line, slowing down our immediate access to the couple. We are outside, looking in. The white, elegantly proportioned pitcher sitting on the table is central to the composition of the painting. Its form echoes the curve of the gentleman's arm, and its color helps to link the foreground to the background. The purity of this form gives it an almost sacramental character, symbolically reinforcing the theme of comfort and harmony provided by love. The mirror is one of Vermeer's primary creative tools. Using the mirror, Vermeer allows us to look down on the woman, the carpeted table, and the tiled floor of the room. The sensitivity with which he has rendered the reflection is remarkable. He set it back into the mirror rather than placing it on the surface by painting the forms softer and smaller, and by depicting the distorted reflections along the mirror's beveled edge. Vermeer uses the mirror to give us another viewpoint of the woman, revealing her most inner thoughts. By leaving the woman's original position in the mirror, gazing at the man, he suspends that psychological moment forever. It is this poetic image in the mirror that draws us emotionally into the heart of the painting. The mirror is one of Vermeer's primary creative tools. Using the mirror, Vermeer allows us to look down on the woman, the carpeted table, and the tiled floor of the room. The sensitivity with which he has rendered the reflection is remarkable. He set it back into the mirror rather than placing it on the surface by painting the forms softer and smaller, and by depicting the distorted reflections along the mirror's beveled edge. Vermeer uses the mirror to give us another viewpoint of the woman, revealing her most inner thoughts. By leaving the woman's original position in the mirror, gazing at the man, he suspends that psychological moment forever. It is this poetic image in the mirror that draws us emotionally into the heart of the painting. Vermeer manipulated the angle of the mirror for that purpose. Here we see the tilt of the mirror as he painted it. But in order to actually see the scene the mirror reflects, it would have to be drastically tilted by more than 30 degrees. Vermeer manipulated reality to intensify the psychological power of the painting. Understanding the potential of light is a primary aspect of Vermeer's genius. Here we see the room as it most likely would have been lit, given the clues the painting provides. Vermeer then selectively manipulates the light to strengthen the focus. He eliminated the shadows that should exist on the back wall to create an evenly illuminated white surface, providing a backdrop to emphasize the silhouettes of the figures. While Vermeer drastically reduced the shadow at the top of the virginal to allow the upper wall to be gently bathed in light, he darkened the shadow at the base of the window and distorted its angle on the wall. These two divergent shadows hold the virginal in place, the upper shadow leading the eye to the corner of the lid, and the lower shadow drawing our eye to where the leg meets the floor. Vermeer manipulated the shadows beneath the virginal by placing them closer to each other than they would really be, giving them greater substance and emphasizing the silhouetted shapes of the legs. He eliminated the shadow of the virginal's body against the rear wall in order to reinforce this effect. Vermeer completes this masterpiece by inserting his own presence. Showing the reflection of his easel in the top of the mirror, he reminds us that the artist is clearly present and in complete control. He is the master of what we see.
The Little Street is one incredible painting. It's really the one I would most like to have at home. It's one of these paintings that somehow brings you back to your childhood, makes you remember what it was like to be a kid, to look out across the way and see life going on just like it always had gone on. You'd see the woman sitting there doing a little thing, you see the kids playing on the street, you see the little maid in the back. They've been there time after time after time. You know, something very comforting about this world. It's a very contained world. It's a view of a street, but it's what's interesting is you don't feel like you need to go left or right. You're very happy right there. You're very happy. You don't want to go anyplace else. Vermeer somehow has created a sense of a street, and you don't want to walk down it. You just want to stay and look at this little world that he's given you. And one of the magical things, one of the reasons that that happens, is because of that red shutter. That red shutter says stop. That red shutter says you've gone far enough, you don't have to go any further. So that red shutter is really important to blocking, limiting, to giving that sense of comfort in that world he's created. to the left of the door, you see that there's not nearly enough space for the shutters on the two windows to the left to completely open. So Vermeer has actually adjusted the architecture of the building, widened the space between the window on the far right and the door to allow that shutter to open flat, because he needed that red there. He knew he needed that red flat against the wall in order to complete that composition. So there is a wonderful example of color being used for compositional purposes.
He's a colorist from the word go. From the very beginning, he's a great colorist. And what changes in his color is from a warm tonality, from reds and yellows to the yellow and blue, to the cool. And then the silvery quality of his light. And I don't think he divorced the light from the color. It's all of a piece. He can get the sheen and the texture in a magical way. Vermeer does this. You paint satin, it really looks like satin. Crisp, you can almost hear it. And the pile of a rug, or the bread, the crustiness of a bread, the color is doing that. Or the water in a view of Delft, the viscous water, fameous, or the color of the clouds. And mind you, that vault in the view of Delft, that sky, is just unbelievable. You know, you say that Vermeer copies nature. Nonsense. Those clouds, he organized those clouds. Clouds aren't that way. Clouds don't stand still for a landscape painter. He has to figure out, how am I going to arrange them? And he keeps them horizontal. So you have a sense of the great vault, and then of the heavens, and then it goes back to the horizon. And he's doing that all with color.
His color is intense. He can use one color next door to another with the most brilliant intensity. There's a great example in The Girl with the Red Hat, where she is wearing this beautiful blue costume. And the highlights, instead of being lighter blue, which is what you would expect, are yellow, which is opposite to blue, and therefore creates this shimmer. And this nobody else does this. And it is absolutely extraordinary. And that painting is a brilliant display of colour. She's sitting against this rich woven tapestry, marvellous interweaving of these shapes, all of which are brilliantly placed. Not one has a little thing out of place. They all play a part in getting this fabulous sense of this moment, of this girl turning towards you, catching the light on her face and in her hat. And it's a brilliant, brilliant piece of observation and translation of that into this painting.
When you're able to hold the girl with the red hat in your hands, that is a very special feeling. And in doing that, you really sense the artist at work. There's a whole different relationship that you have at that time. Little things that are hard to pick up in the gallery. For example, Vermeer gives this radiance of her vision with a little turquoise highlight that he puts in her eye, and this wonderful pink highlight in the mouth. It's little accents like that that just make it come alive and have this kind of vivid quality. Vermeer works in glazes, very thin glazes, and the blues in particular are very thinly painted. He uses natural ultramarine, which is a wonderful, pure pigment. He prepared that area of the blue robe with a reddish-brown underpainting, and that gives a certain warmth to the blue. So when he paints it very thinly, you have this warm glow that comes to the background. So it's not just a cool blue, it has this inner warmth that ties it into the red of the hat and the orange of the cheeks, and the sort of the whole humanity of the image comes across through that means. And he uses his material and his techniques to enhance the emotional and psychological qualities of his work.
The Girl with the Red Hat is a sensuous painting. It is intimate and immediate. She communicates directly with us. Vermeer's use of color drives the emotional power of this painting. He sets the figure against the muted tones of a tapestry, concentrating color on the flame red of her hat and the lushness of her blue robe. Vermeer established an ochre base for the background of the painting. The soft tones of the tapestry elegantly emerge from that color. The lion head finials define the foreground and place the figure in space. Quick, strong strokes suggest the basic contours and structure of the heads. Using reddish-brown color for the base of the robe, Vermeer covered it with deep blue to establish its form. The brown bleeds through, and the combination of colors creates an extraordinary sense of warmth. He applied a delicate blue glaze to define the folds of the fabric. His use of thinly painted glazes creates depth, and the addition of ice blue highlights provides a shimmering quality. The face is established first in shadow. Vermeer used an opaque, deep red-orange paint as the underground for the hat. The red is an intensely warm and active color. It heightens the immediacy of the girl's gaze. A succession of semi-transparent strokes of light red and orange creates the feathery appearance of the hat. Vermeer demonstrates his sensitivity to the effects of reflected light by placing a dark purple hue on the underside of the hat. He subtly casts an orange-red reflection across the girl's face to accentuate the effect the red has on the viewer. He then uses green, the complementary color of red, to create the shadows on the face, enhancing both colors. Vermeer paints the cravat in a brilliant white. After laying the white down, he scraped away some of the paint to create definition. The white in the center of the composition cradles the face and focuses attention on her expression. Vermeer draws upon the power of light to increase the intensity of the color and to animate the painting, adding soft and shimmering highlights that crystallize the form of the finials, yellow highlights to enhance the blue of the robe and accentuate the quality of its color, delicate strokes finishing the texture and lushness of her hat, and highlights on the earring, nose and lips to bring the face to life. His crowning touches are the placement of the pink on her lips and the turquoise in her eye. Vermeer's extraordinary use of color encourages a dialogue between the viewer and the girl and enhances the sense of poetry that flows throughout his paintings.
Vermeer was trying to emulate effects that he would have seen in an optical device called a camera obscura. Some of those qualities of this immediacy of looking out of this more momentary character of this painting may in fact be partially explained by the inspiration of the camera obscura. Now, he didn't really paint from a camera obscura. He certainly didn't copy the camera obscura, but it was a way of seeing, it was a way of enriching the way he saw that he then would apply and create and adapt in paintings such as this.
Camera obscura means darkened chamber. Its images were seen as magical in the 17th century, often described as nature's paintings. Its process is simple. When the camera faces an image on the outside, rays of light enter into the darkened chamber through a convex lens on the front of the box, projecting an inverted and reversed image on the surface of the glass viewing window at the back of the camera. The image contains optical effects, such as diffused or soft highlights. This is an actual black and white image of a lion head finial as seen through a camera obscura. The impact of this optical effect can clearly be seen when we place it next to Vermeer's painted finial in The Girl with the Red Hat.
Those finials are a marvelous example of what you will see from a camera obscura. They're slightly out of focus in a way, and yet he's managed that light on them in the most brilliant way. The highlights are made by building up layers of paint, starting with an opaque layer, then building translucent layers, one on top of another, and finishing with little spots of bright white light. And those spots of bright white light are intense. And in fact, they remind me of the pearls that you see so often in Vermeer's paintings, where he does exactly the same thing, where he puts this circle of translucent white paint, greyish white paint, to create the roundness of the pearl, and then this little blob of white paint in the centre which creates the light. It's exactly the same way that he paints the finials. It's quite extraordinary.
I think the most magical moment, perhaps in all of Vermeer's work, is in The Lace Maker. What a wonderful painting. And you have this woman, this intent woman who's busy with her activity of lace making. In the foreground, you have this thread spilling out of this cushion, totally diffused. I mean, you cannot make out what these are. This incredible, unfocused quality of these threads. It's amazing, and that is such a wonderful example of what one would see in a camera obscura focused closely on an individual, where you focus the image on the face of the individual, and the foreground then gets entirely out of focus.
With Vermeer, there's this marvelous softness where outlines are soft, every layer flows into one another. And so you get this fabulous sense, this poetic sense of light and movement, whether it be on a tabletop, whether it be on a wall, whether it be on a person's face. Everything is very, very soft and flowing from one layer into another. There are no hard edges. To look at a Vermeer through a microscope is an extraordinary experience, because you see all this flowing, all these soft edges. You wonder whether you're looking at the edge of the finger or something else when you're looking at a woman's hand. So soft are they. And he achieved this by painting wet in wet. Now, this is very simple. He would put down one layer, let's say, of opaque paint. While it was still wet, he would put another layer on top. And because the underlying layer was still wet, they would meld together, soften together. The edges would just blur a little bit. And there would be this flowing of these edges. So if you have a number of layers, one on top of the other, doing this, this is creating this extraordinary sense of atmosphere, diffusion of light, this marvelous feeling of the form without having to describe every little fine detail. And a very good example of this is the little street in Delft. The house which has this facade of a brick wall, where if you look at it you think that every little brick has been painted very distinctly. Absolutely not. When you look at it, it's a texture which gives you the sense of all this brickwork, not every little brick. And so he's creating this movement throughout the whole surface of the painting by this technique of painting wet in wet. It's quite ingenious.
There's illusion of texture in Vermeer's work. The most extraordinary textural effects are probably in the View of Delft, and I think the View of Delft is really amazing because there's this view of this city seen from across the waterway and across the harbor, and yet it seems so immediate, so real. There's something so intense about that view that it just comes out at you. And it's color, it's light, but it's really texture that is at the core of that. And he does lots of different things to create this effect in this painting. One of the amazing things, if you look at the roof lines, the different types of roofs, the orange tile roofs on the left, for example, have a kind of a bumpy character that he creates by having a sand layer mixed with lead white underneath the paint. So it's a lumpy base specific to that area. So he very consciously wanted to create the effect of texture three-dimensionally, and then he puts on it the orange and little highlights on top, little dots on top of it. Then when it comes to the boats, this wonderful feeling of light flickering off the water onto the sides of the boats that he does without any three-dimensional texture, but with all this handling of paint with these various diffuse layers, these little circles, these diffuse highlights, and then opaque highlights on top of it. Very interweaving of thin and thick and thin and thick. It's different in different parts of the painting, but it's all to serve a certain effect. It's really interesting to photograph it from here because everything always seems out of focus. It's one of these strangest things. And even restorers have been bothered by this, and this painting, The Woman Writing a Letter, is a wonderful example where when we brought it into restoration, the arm was in fact quite precise in definition, and we discovered that in fact the restorer had made a contour line along that arm to make it defined in space, sort of losing the whole quality of light that Vermeer was creating.
That is so unlike Vermeer. And Vermeer did not create hard edges. They were all soft. And this repaint was quite clearly much later than Vermeer. And having established that this paint was false, it was removed very easily with no damage to the underlying. And there you see this typical lovely soft edge to her arm as she leans rather, she caresses the table in the same way that she's caressing the letter which she's writing. It is the most intimate, quiet painting. In fact, I think it's the most quiet, soulful of all of his paintings, as far as I'm concerned.
Part of the magic of Vermeer is to create more than he actually is put down. The sense of more there than there is. And that happens a lot with color. Color, he uses color so selectively, and you feel this wonderful yellow of her jacket. But when you look at it carefully, you see, in fact, that there's very little yellow there. It's only in those highlights where the light is hitting the form that he's actually using the lead tin yellow to give that focus. For the rest, it's really done in ochres. It's very subtle, very understated. This is something that he does throughout his career. It's this suggestion of form, suggestion of color, suggestion of space, done with the most minimum of means. The suggestion of narrative, suggestion of emotional energy. The feeling of mood is just the hints of these things. So what happens then is that we complete them. He leaves lots of room for us to enter into these scenes and for us to become part of the whole experience, to create it, to fulfill it, to finish it in our own individual ways.
Vermeer is a man of great dignity, and we see it in his mature works in a beautiful way. The servants are as dignified as the mistress of the household. And the milkmaid is, to me, a masterwork, and it's a serving woman that he's representing there. It's not the dignity of humankind, because it doesn't embrace all of you, but it's the dignity of women. I love it, and I love women.
There's this wonderverful sense of this love of women, which comes through on every occasion. None of his women are hard. None of them are angry in any way. They're all concerned with fairly daily occupations, very gentle, very warm occupations that he seemed to enjoy.
To me, one of the most moving pictures, the most poetic pictures by Vermeer, is a painting in Berlin of a woman putting on a necklace. And that gesture of a woman doing nothing but just about to clasp the pearl necklace, that's something no writer can do. You can only see a woman put on a necklace. But to have captured that moment, that to me is one of the most beautiful things that Vermeer ever created. It's the life of women that he's painting. Men don't come in very often. Or women reading a letter, women writing a letter, women delivering a letter. This quiet existence of women. That's much of the poetry of Vermeer. What makes a Vermeer a Vermeer? That's a very difficult question. I've been worrying about that question for about 60 years.
For me, it is that extraordinary quality that he has of inviting you in and keeping you away, that enigmatic feeling that he creates. He is telling you a story, and yet there's almost like a veil between you and the painting. There is not an immediacy between you and the painting, although you're fooled into thinking there is one.
There's something so personal about a Vermeer painting. It's one of these kinds of images that you really want to see all by yourself. You don't want to be interrupted, you don't want to hear noises around you.
Oh, you can't put it into words, really. Just as when we see a great baseball player and his form is fabulous, what makes him so great? Or there's a great cook and they have a great meal, what makes it so great? Well, you can talk a bit about it, but there's always something you can't put into words.
He raises these scenes of life into something that is very, very special. How come that a milkmaid just pouring milk into a jug can produce this moment of magic on a canvas? This extraordinary sense of light and moment in which you feel there is so much depth. There is so much more than just this simple domestic act. And he raises up these pictures into this ethereal level, which is very hard for us to comprehend. And he really is a genius at making these scenes quite magical and quite mysterious.
At the same time, it's so universal. There's something about that image that is meaningful to all of humanity. There's truths, there are underlying truths, there are fundamental truths about human existence. There are a sense of harmony, of life, the relationship of man and nature, the joy of life, the sense of possibility in such an understated and subtle way that you just come back to it over and over again and just feel enriched by the experience.
makes a Vermeer a Vermeer? Perhaps there is no single answer, but rather it is a combination of answers which is different for each and every one of us. This is at the very heart of what seeing is all about.
The artist who created this painting made some of the most precious masterpieces of Northern Europe. His paintings include Girl with a Pearl Earring and The Milkmaid. But it is this one, The Art of Painting, which he took to be his masterpiece.
This is the most theatrical of all Vermeer's works. You do seem to be looking at a stage set rather than a simple domestic interior.
Made during the golden age of Dutch art, Vermeer singled out this picture to market his skills.
In the art of painting, Vermeer takes the allegorical and the mythical and he brings it to earth. He sets the world of history inside the world of an ordinary Dutch house.
Created some 200 years before the invention of the camera, the painting still speaks to modern filmmakers.
Vermeer was the first cinematographer because he dealt in a world completely manifest by light.
So underappreciated at first that another painter's signature was added to it. The painting grew in stature, only to fall into the hands of the world's most sinister art collector.
History, glory, honor, triumph. I think that the content of the painting has special meaning for Hitler.
The picture certainly must have had special meaning for Vermeer. In spite of his chronic shortage of money, he never once tried to sell it, and kept it by him till he died. Tucked into a corner of the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, the painting is so perfect that you almost forget that it's rendered in paint.
You can almost breathe the air in the room. You can almost feel the chilly morning light on your face. The way the map is crinkled, it's actually moving. It's slightly crinkling and rustling in the breeze.
The girl that is featured is so mysterious. She sort of glows in that light.
I was intrigued. I'd like to have been able to see around the corner a little and see whether that was a death mask on the table.
The atmosphere is really, really quiet. I think you don't want to say a word to interrupt.
But such calm must have been a rarity in the life of Johannes Vermeer. He lived a life of hectic poverty, unable even to afford the fees due for his apprenticeship as an artist in 1653. That same year, when he was 21 years old, Vermeer was married to Catharina Bones. But the couple was so poor they couldn't afford to set up their own home. They had to lodge instead with Vermeer's mother-in-law. And in her house, they went on to have 11 children. Maria, Elizabeth, Cornelia, Aledis, Beatrix, Johannes, Gertrude, Franciscus, Katharina, Ignatius, and one more whose name we don't know.
It must have been a noisy house, it must have been a boisterous house. You can't control little tiny kids. Rather puzzlingly, we don't get any reflection in his art
of the 11 children.
Delft, Vermeer's hometown, was full of artists. With 11 mouths to feed, Vermeer must have had to work as hard as any of them. Art as a business was booming in Holland, but the fierce competition forced prices down, a tendency well understood by the new type of customer for Dutch art. He was the thriving middle-class man of business. He had money to spend and no liking for bare walls.
It's amazing how many paintings were in houses of the wealthy. I mean, you can find inventories with 100, even up to 200 or more paintings. They were really crammed in those rooms.
This new class of self-made men had supplanted the aristocracy and the church as the chief consumers and commissioners of art. They weren't looking for biblical or mythological scenes. They wanted to see themselves. Suddenly, the fashionable topic for painting was the daily life of the ordinary citizen.
You have all kinds of aspects of family life, from the very simple, where you get perhaps 2 figures, to the most animated, the most boisterous groups of parents, children, animals, all mixed together, bashing each other about.
Painters would depict the most mundane and even unsightly tasks. Here, a mother delousing her daughter's hair, by the Delft artist Pieter de Hoog.
They would specialize in a sort of a niche area, perhaps even as niche as still lifes of breakfast pieces or landscapes that are always rainy or something like that.
There was a lot of competition, and if you weren't quite as good as the other guy who specialized in your subject, you might well fall on hard times.
Vermeer's speciality was the quiet domestic interior. He often showed a woman engaged in some absorbing or private activity, pouring milk or reading a letter. But even within that small territory, he had local rivals. Pieter de Hoog, for one. An accepted way of attracting custom at the time was to allow possible buyers into the painter's studio.
It's very hard for us to believe, but potential patrons would knock on the artist's door, go in and see him at the easel, almost, I think, as a kind of way of proving to themselves that this was the genuine thing.
The difficulty for a Delft artist without means was that he had to sell paintings to live, but he had to keep back some in his studio to advertise his skills. It's recorded that one summer's day in 1663, a rich French diplomat came knocking on Vermeer's door, hoping to buy. To the artist's shame, he had nothing to show him. He had to lead the French diplomat round to someone who had previously bought a couple of his paintings, a local baker. The diplomat was not impressed and didn't commission. In this failure lies the probable origin of the art of painting.
We're talking about a very market-driven world here. Even the most brilliant artists could be unseated, could fall from favour, could be regarded as, you know, yesterday's men.
While the known details of Vermeer's life are very few, the evidence points to the art of painting being created as a show-off piece, something he made to ensure he would always have a great picture to show to visitors. Its very size sets it apart from most of Vermeer's work. The girl with a pearl earring is a modest 17 by 15 inches. So is woman holding a balance. The girl with a red hat is an even tinier 9.5 by 7. The art of painting is over 4 times that size, and quite a gamble for a struggling artist. Perhaps 6 months' work for a painting not intended for sale.
it was probably worth something like 1,000 guilders at the time when Vermeer normally received 500 or 600 guilders for the average work. And when a middle-class family could live on about 500 guilders in a year.
It is exceptional that he kept it, and it is also given a quite specific title. It is called not, as you might call it, just from looking at it, the artist in his studio, the painter and his model. It is called the schilderkunst, the art of painting.
A further corroboration is supplied by this painting, now lost, by a younger Dutch artist called Michael van Musser. Full of similarities to the Vermeer work, it was also called the art of painting, and was certainly kept by van Musser in his studio as a demonstration item.
He could have it there, in the studio, hanging on the wall, so that he could guide people into the studio, and they would be duly astounded by the technique, by the skill, by the vision of this extraordinary man.
The viewers presumed to be a male and sophisticated. And this was talked about at the time, that is, the idea that painting like people can be seductive, pull you into the picture.
In the foreground, the curtain is turned invitingly aside by an unseen hand. There is a chair placed discreetly on the left, as if the viewer is meant to take a seat and look over the anonymous artist's shoulder. The painter's identity remains hidden, though we sense his absorption in the task of painting his rather curious subject, the model with her book, trumpet, and laurel wreath. Her downcast eyes seem to survey the objects on the table, the fabric, book, and mask.
What is the relationship between the artist and the model? Why has she got her eyes downcast in this way? Perhaps he said something a little inappropriate to her. Perhaps he's made some kind of suggestion. You speculate like that. You intended to speculate.
Some believe that this is Vermeer's wife Katerina, who would have been about 35 at the time. Of Vermeer's 34 paintings, no less than 18 focus on a single woman. Whoever the woman in the art of painting was, her face was perfectly pleasing to the 17th century art lover.
They liked red lips and they liked little dimples in the chin. But I think that the complexion and the white, very clear skin was absolutely very attractive to contemporary viewers.
She's demure, and her expression, which is faintly smiling and looking down as if some voyeuristic gentleman has entered the room, and I mean, you can almost imagine a patron thinking, well, Vermeer is interesting, his pictures are attractive, but boy, that model's attractive too.
It isn't just the model who is designed to appeal to the visiting patron. The painter may be faceless, but what can be seen of him is also intended to impress the fashionable patron. This is no scruffy vagabond in a spattered smock, but a rather trendy gentleman. Red undergarments were all the rage, because red looked warmer than any other colour. And a slashed doublet, the height of fashion in 1667. The more slashes, the more modish the look. The whole outfit rounded off by a pair of impressively baggy breeches, another up-to-the-minute accessory. Designed thus to appeal to the connoisseur, the painting wasn't just a fashion statement, it was also a show-off piece, and a fanfare to painting in very specific ways.
In the painting, we have these various, you might say, symbols or references quite specific to other art forms, such as the map on the back wall, which could stand for printmaking or engraving, the mask on the table for sculpture, the tapestry itself, and so on. But we also have, throughout the picture, demonstrations of what only painting can do. The scintillation of daylight on different kinds of surfaces and softness, leather textures, silks, satins.
A front-rank artist in 17th century Holland had to be able to mimic as perfectly as possible the effects of nature, to be aware of shadow, of tone, and of light. The art of painting shows just how acutely Vermeer observed and recreated subtle effects, like how light falls through a window. The shadow which falls below the rod of the map falls steeply. The shadows made by the nails above the map are much flatter. Vermeer was an intricately detailed painter, but he also achieved his effects quickly and with great economy.
And he indicated rather than finished. Indication is of course a fantastic skill. If you can indicate without finishing, make us finish in our eyes, because we know what we're seeing and we finish it off.
It was several years after the catastrophic visit by the French diplomat that the art of painting appeared. In the meantime, it's thought that Vermeer painted a lady writing and woman holding a balance, amongst several others. He may have painted quickly, but the art of painting was planned in great detail. There's proof of this care in the outlines on the canvas. By looking at how the areas of the paint overlap with each other, it's possible to work out the sequence in which Vermeer painted each object.
Well, this is quite an important image to show, which illustrates very clearly that the wall was painted after the map and the drapery. One would imagine that the painting would be painted from the back wall forward, but in reality it is not. When you look at the painting very closely, it becomes rather clear that the figures, the chandelier and the drapery and part of the work on the table and the chair in the front were painted first.
He must have been very sure that he wouldn't change his mind once he had started painting. Why spend time on the chandelier and the figures in all their detail if you were only going to paint over them? It suggests that Vermeer had planned everything in this picture before he went near it with a paintbrush. He was not always so decisive. X-rays reveal that in A Girl Asleep, he's painted out a dog in the doorway. In Woman Reading a Love Letter, a too obvious painting of Cupid was removed from the back wall. The art of painting is strikingly different. Despite being the most complicated of his paintings, there are no changes whatsoever. It suggests a different method of work, because there are further puzzles. Centuries before the invention of the camera, this image is photographic in its realism and in the most precise way. Artist and model are in focus, for example, but foreground objects, the curtain, the fabric on the table, are blurred. This is exact to focus. Some analysts believe Vermeer knew about this and created his painting with such speedy accuracy because he was, in effect, using a kind of camera. Artists in Holland had been experimenting since the 1620s with this device, the camera obscura. Light enters the camera through a lens at the front of a wooden box. The light travels through the box and bounces off a mirror inside it. The reflected image appears on a glass screen fitted into the top of the camera obscura. By Vermeer's time, these cameras had become quite sophisticated. They were portable and used glass lenses, and the image they produced was sharper and more vivid in tone and colour. If Vermeer traced his picture from an image projected by a camera obscura, then the art of painting is a scale drawing of a real scene. The nearest to a photograph he could have got. Trying to prove the truth of this has been a 25-year obsession for the architect Professor Philip Stedman, who has used the painting to create a 1/6 scale model of Vermeer's presumed studio.
I was teaching an exercise in which we got students to reconstruct the spaces in paintings. And we took Vermeer because he has tiled floors. And that provides a grid by which you can work the perspective backwards.
10 of Vermeer's paintings give enough clues about the dimensions of the room to do this, with floor tiles, windows, and ceiling height. And in the art of painting, there's something even better. 2 copies of the original map still exist, so we know its actual size.
His reproductions of the maps and globes, it's spectacular. It's unnecessarily precise. You could overlay his painting on the real map and it would fit precisely.
For this experiment, Stedman has placed his camera at the exact point where Vermeer would have traced the image onto canvas. An artificial sky mimics the light of 17th century Delft, and this metal dish plays the role of the sun.
The camera obscura turns a three-dimensional scene into a picture, into areas of dark and light. I believe very strongly that these are real scenes with real objects. He worked like a 19th century studio photographer. He composed with his models, said to the woman, turn your arm, whatever, and he could see in the camera image his composition.
The image on Stedman's camera turns out to be an exact 6th scale replica of Vermeer's painting. If the art of painting is a snapshot of an actual moment, then everything in it existed. It shows us an actual moment on a real morning, with props laid out for real people to pick up before assuming their positions. The model, with her trumpet and her book. The artist, with his mahl stick and beret. It's a very seductive notion, but for some, far too seductive.
So much of what he shows you is too beautiful to be real. It's sort of like Architectural Digest for the interior and Vogue magazine for the woman. It's a plausible reality, and you identify with it if you're looking in the magazine. You think, gee, I'd like to live like that or be with this woman. His content in general is about ideal young women in ideal homes.
This sumptuous interior has seduced countless viewers into imagining they are looking past a curtain into Vermeer's actual studio. But there are certain plain facts of Dutch history which some insist prove that this wondrous space simply never existed.
There were virtually no marble floors anywhere in the Netherlands at this time. It's a great misconception. You would have found such marble tiles maybe in a few small rooms of a prince's house or a brand new foyer in a mansion of Amsterdam, not in a middle-class artist's house.
The 17th century is called the Small Ice Age. It was a very cold period, and these marble floors would be utterly cold to sit on, and they would be too heavy on the first and the second floor in houses. So it's purely a trick, in my opinion, giving richness to the interior.
An artist that reached that perfection as Vermeer didn't really need to have a model. And if one thinks of the reality, a married man with 11 children, it would have been highly unlikely that this was a room that was really present in his house.
The illusion is so convincing that we don't even notice some glaring problems with the scale of the artist and the model. If the painter stood up, he would be more than twice the size of the woman.
He would be much too big, or the girl is much too tiny. So that there are some discrepancies there in the way that these elements would work if you would recreate them in reality. You actually wouldn't be able to do that without having a midget and a giant put into an interior.
Vermeer may have been painting scenes from everyday life, but they were probably as made up as a soap opera. An artist's manual from the time explained what skills were expected of a painter. A perfect painting is like a mirror of nature, in which things that are not there appear to be there, and which deceives in an acceptable, amusing, and praiseworthy fashion. These women were no more real than saints or figures from mythology.
What makes a brilliant craftsman, a wonderful artist, is that artistic nerve that really makes us believe that this is real without it necessarily being so. A notion used in the 17th century, schijn zonder zijn, it looks like without being.
But between the two extremes, Vermeer copying every detail from a camera obscura and making the whole thing up, there is a middle way by which a photo-like precision could have been achieved.
He might look at a camera obscura image, another painting, one of his own earlier paintings, or reality. That impression immediately becomes part of his bag of artistic tricks, and he can repeat it without seeing it. The very thing this picture tells us is a lie, in a sense.
If you look closely, some of Vermeer's trickery is revealed. A clue lies in the canvas itself, just below the map rod on the model's right hand. Still visible today, there's a tiny pinprick in the surface of the canvas. By attaching a pin and a piece of string to the canvas in the exact position of this pinhole, something remarkable happens. The string exactly lines up with each row of floor tiles, and even the tabletop. Here was a simple rule of geometry that could help to achieve perfect perspective.
He would have used a very simple trick, a basic tool that carpenters, bricklayers and artists throughout centuries have been using. He could apply chalk to this string, and by then holding it taut between one hand and flipping it up with another, he would be able to do like this, and he would create a line of chalk that he could use to construct all the lines that he would need to go and end up in one in the vanishing point. And he could keep the string hanging in that pinhole all the way throughout the painting process as a guide for himself to be sure that he got it right. By doing this, and then at the end of the process taking out the pin, he would leave a slight little imprint, a little dot, a little pinprick in the paint layer. And in 17 of his paintings, that little pinhole is still visible to the naked eye if you're up in front of the painting. It's not hidden, his technique is used. It's there for every one of us to see, actually, if we just see it.
The pinhole marks the vanishing point, which is where all the perspective lines in the painting meet. But this tiny pinprick does more than just get the perspective right. Vermeer is drawing our attention to the very heart of the picture.
Places the vanishing point near the place that he wants you to look. So in this instance, the vanishing point is placed right in front of the model.
Vermeer wants you to look there because the key to the hidden meaning of the painting lies in the model and her strange attire.
She is dressed up in this finery, this extraordinary kind of billowing costume, and rather sort of weighed down with too many bits and pieces. I mean, I feel rather sorry for her actually, because she's carrying, after all, this enormous volume.
It wasn't until 1950 that a French art critic stumbled across the significance of the model's dress. The key to his discovery was in this book, Cesare Ripa's Iconologia. This was a dictionary of symbols used by 17th century artists to give them the information required for the painting of historical characters. It includes a description of the muse of history, whose attributes are clearly set out. She wears a crown of laurel leaves and carries a trumpet and a book. The crown stands for glory and eternal life, the trumpet for fame, and the book is a repository of history itself. 300 years after she was painted, the model finally had been identified and named. She was Cleo, the muse of history.
Suddenly, the painting became very complex. Many reasons and many different interpretations were given to the subject. But Vermeer much remains a mystery, and it's all the more tempting to fill up this mystery.
One factor that surely counts is that Vermeer was a Catholic living in the Protestant Dutch Republic. There are those who believe that the history enshrined here is that of the Dutch Catholics. The two-headed eagle on the chandelier is the emblem of the Catholic Habsburg dynasty that formerly ruled Holland. The lack of candles might suggest that the light of Catholicism had been extinguished in Vermeer's homeland. The map shows the old Catholic Netherlands. By the 1660s, the country was divided, and it's been suggested that the prominent crease in the centre of the map shows a boundary which Vermeer would wish to see dissolved.
I prefer to see it as rather more subtle. It's not just one crease running through this map, there are lots of them. And you get the feeling he's wanting to convey in a more generalised way the fact that even though it is a newfound state, there are lots of pressures there, there are lots of fissures running through it.
We will never be sure what significance these objects carried for Vermeer, but we can see what he has chosen to highlight on the picture within a picture. So far, the artist has painted only one thing: Cleo's laurel wreath, a detail we're meant to notice and interpret.
Vermeer is very proudly proclaiming that as the centrepiece of the picture. He's saying, actually, however difficult my life may be, I am buoyed up by the knowledge that I'm good and that I'm going to last. And people, centuries later, are going to stare at my work and admire it and remember my name.
If those were Vermeer's hopes, then he'd have been desperately dismayed if he'd known the subsequent fate of his masterpiece. In 1675, his widow wrote,
"As a result, and owing to the very great burden of his children, having no means of his own, he had lapsed into such a decay and decadence, which he had so taken to heart, that in a day or day and a half, he had gone from being healthy to being dead."
As was customary, an inventory of the deceased's effects was made, listing all valuable items. When the notary visited the house on the 29th of February 1676, he found distressingly little.
2 vrouwenhemden, 2 women's vests, 21 kinderhemden, 21 children's vests.
Vermeer left his family with huge debts. The baker alone was owed 726 guilders, which would have bought a decent house in Delft at the time.
2 schildersezels, 2 eagles, 3 paletten, 3 pallets, 6 panelen, 6 panels.
There's no mention of Vermeer's most valuable asset, the art of painting. Here, Katerina has signed the inventory which says she'd acted in good faith without holding back anything. But this wasn't quite true. A week before this inventory was taken, Katerina had given the art of painting to her mother, so that it couldn't be used to settle her husband's debts. This sleight of hand failed to deceive the executor of the estate, Antony van Leeuwenhoek, a famed Delft microscopist. He ruled that the transfer of the work had been illegal and ordered the painting to be auctioned off. But there is no record of the buyer or the price. So Vermeer's personal showpiece, the painting that not even the direst poverty had induced him to sell, and which his wife had tried in vain to protect, left the family home forever. And that is the last we hear of it for over 100 years. When it reappeared, it had undergone a terrible humiliation. Vermeer's badge of fame, his symbol of self-esteem, had been attributed to somebody else. Though Vermeer's own signature is readable on the canvas, another name had been added. And as the final irony, it was Peter de Hoogh, his arch-rival.
This is a painting above all about fame, about the fact that the painter's reputation will outlast him. And here is the signature of somebody else, mistakenly, probably quite irresponsibly, added in order to boost the value of the picture.
By this time, the painting was owned by a minor Austrian nobleman, Johann Rudolf, Count Chenin, who had acquired it in 1813 from a local saddle maker. He paid just 50 florins, a fraction of its value. And that price was for a de Hoogh. He wouldn't have paid half of it for a Vermeer.
It is extraordinary how completely Vermeer disappears from view. He didn't actually have a place, even in the history of Dutch 17th century art, let alone the greater picture of European painting in general.
It was the popularity of photography in the 1860s that gave people a new appreciation of Vermeer.
People could see an analogy between Vermeer's painting and photography. But not only photography, the art that was dominant in France in the middle of the 19th century was realism, and people were moving towards impressionism. These were paintings which took ordinary life seriously.
The reputation of the art of painting grew decade by decade, until by the 20th century it was an object of veneration.
It was not only the most valuable painting in the Chenin collection, but perhaps in all of Vienna at that time. It had been on public display since 1845, and it was truly part of the city's public, its cultural identity, if you will.
But at the height of the painting's new fame, its fortunes took an unfortunate turn. First, its ownership passed to the black sheep of the Chenin family, 21-year-old Jaromir.
My father was too young and too inexperienced and too, now one would say, too much of a playboy, to be responsible and to really take care of this work of art.
Jaromir was desperate to sell it to fund his way of life, but the politics of art got in his way. Vermeer's painting was now deemed so important that a law had been passed blocking its export, and no one within Austria could afford to buy it. Then everything changed, with the arrival of the 20th century's most voracious amassers of art. The 11th of March 1938 brought the annexation of Austria. Hitler was obsessed by art, and Vienna was a grand resource awaiting exploitation.
It's really one of the paradoxes of the Third Reich that these malevolent leaders who were intent on wars of conquest and genocide could devote so much time to art and culture. As Aryans, they were supposed to promote culture and have an interest in culture. It was a sign of their spiritual depth, their intellectual superiority, and ultimately their racial superiority.
Hitler had strong views about art. He rejected modernism, believing it degenerate. But he considered Vermeer to embody all the highest ideals of painting. His second-in-command, Hermann Goering, agreed. Even though Hitler had long admired the painting, Goering attempted to buy it for himself. Using a frontman to disguise his bid, his offer of 1.85 million Reichsmarks was accepted by Jaromir. The story is played out in these original documents.
8. Dezember 1939.
On behalf of and instructed by Minister-President Field Marshal Goering, I herewith inform you that the State Field Marshal has authorized the sale of the painting The Art of Painting by Vermeer. But Goering's plan was not to be.
As soon as Goering expressed an interest in the painting and wanted to take it out of Vienna, authorities in the city of Vienna itself appealed to Hitler, to the Reichschancellery, and said, no, this is an important cultural treasure. It must remain here. Can't we keep it in the Kunsthistorisches Museum? And Hitler appeared to be persuaded.
The Führer wishes the painting to remain in the art gallery, and without his personal consent, the painting cannot be at anyone's command. The sale was stopped just in time. The document authorizing the deal is marked with a scrawled red cross, cancelling the transaction. But if the Viennese thought it was for them that the painting had been saved, they were deluded.
Hitler had very complex feelings about Vienna. He had experienced very difficult times there as a young man before World War I. He thought that the Jewish influence was far too strong, and it appeared to be part of his agenda, part of his political agenda, to debase Vienna in some way.
With the original sale aborted, Hitler himself got the painting for a knockdown price, 1.65 million Reichsmark. He moved it to the basement of a storehouse in Munich. Only a few senior Nazi cronies knew it was there, stockpiled as it was among 8,000 other works of art. The art of painting was to be a centerpiece of Hitler's plan to create a vast cultural center in his hometown of Linz. Its giant art gallery would be crammed with masterpieces, many of them looted from occupied countries and dispossessed Jewish families.
To give a sense of perspective, the National Gallery of Art today has about 3,000 paintings, the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam has 5,000, and so Hitler and the Führer Museum having 8,000 paintings already collected and many more at his disposal if he wanted to choose them. This was going to be a monumental museum.
On his 54th birthday, Hitler announced his plans in a brochure called Art for the People. It styles the Führer himself as the saviour of Germanic art. And on the cover, Hitler puts the art of painting.
The art of painting was probably the most important painting in the Führer Museum collection. The content of the painting has special meaning for Hitler. It deals with history, it deals with glory, one thinks about the trumpet and one thinks about the laurel wreath. It deals with themes that concern Hitler greatly.
But by May 1943, Hitler's favourite painting was facing new threats. Allied bombing was visiting terrible damage on Munich, with nearly half the city destroyed by the end of the war. The 8,000 artworks, including the art of painting, were removed and placed in underground mines for safekeeping. The fabled Vermeer, assigned the number 1096, was stashed in a salt mine at Alt-Aussee, where it stayed until the war's end.
Allied officers inspect the ruins of Berlin, devastated by bombing, and then captured.
With Hitler dead, along with his dreams of monstrous galleries, the Allies entered the mines and began the huge task of returning artworks to their rightful owners.
Deep in a salt mine, American troops break their way into a treasure vault, where they find it.
Leading this mission was a key figure in the art restitution unit, S. Lane Faison. Nothing prepared him for what they would find there.
You see all kinds of things going down, but you come to, let's say, a great opening, and it would be quite a high ceiling, and it might have been 50 yards across, more or less circular.
The main chambers of the mine lay a mile deep inside the mountain. The Allies knew that Hitler had been stealing art, but no one knew quite how actively.
I was utterly astonished at the size, and it grew and grew and grew. This was a man with a butterfly net going around collecting butterflies. This doesn't sound like Hitler, but it was Hitler in his early stages.
American soldiers found the art of painting hidden in a special chamber with a dozen other acknowledged masterpieces. Amazingly, it was in perfect condition. Since its return to Austria in November 1945, the painting has been on show at the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. To the 17th century, it spoke of history in muted tones. We, in this age of moving pictures, tend to see it as a still from a never-made film.
Johannes Vermeer was the first cinematographer because he dealt in those two phenomena, the single precious 24th of a second, instantaneous time, and also the notion of a world completely manifest by light.
Peter Greenaway's 1985 film A Z and Two Noughts reworked Vermeer's images and experimented with updates of his lighting effects.
Most of the light always comes from the left-hand side, a metre and a half off the ground, repeatedly. And we actually did make a list of all the different ways we could light a painting and light a film and make comparisons.
This is Peter Greenaway's take on the art of painting. Give and take, in fact, because elements of other works have been imported in a typically provocative redistribution of Vermeer's themes.
I really do want people to look at this image, repeatedly look at this image, and get what you can from it.
Vermeer's paintings are the greatest film stills ever made. You can read what you want into the pictures, you can complete the story. You're invited to complete the story.
New York artist George Dean has spent 40 years looking at the art of painting. Where Greenaway has added elements to it, Dean has stripped them away.
It always has been a painting that is mysterious, that I've always wanted to do something about. Because I look at the Vermeer paintings a great deal, and often see details I had never seen before. Sometimes I say, I never will get finished looking because I always come out with more information.
Dean's paintings play with our preconceptions by removing the characters from the painting.
When Vermeer's figures disappear, I appear. Sometimes I feel I'm like a mouse crawling in after dark into some of Vermeer's paintings. I've even imagined such a thing so that I could get behind a table, so that if I'm going to remove it, I'd better find out what's behind it. These paintings are quite familiar, and if the figures are gone, there's a question in someone's mind that is answered with vision. They look again. And this is really the core of what I do.
In a sense, the art of painting needed no real content, since its primary task was to show off what Vermeer could do with brushes and paint and his special view of light and darkness. But no great artist can deal only in surfaces, even if he tries. And so over the centuries, a girl dressed as the muse of history becomes the muse of art itself.
Vermeer is working in that play between reality and what you see in the picture. So you see Cleo as the muse of history, you see her as a girl.
Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe by Edouard Manet is a masterpiece that broke all the rules and caused one of the biggest scandals in art history.
This is in-your-face nude painting.
It is a staggering painting. It's extraordinary in terms of its scale and breadth and ambition, and its challenge effectively to the whole history of the nude before it.
It was a shocking painting, a painting that nobody understood, that provoked ridicule and outrage. But it was also new and fresh and visibly defiant. With this one painting, a whole new chapter in art had been opened.
It was so stunning for its time because it was so strange, humorous, outrageous, and really impertinent of Manet.
What it attempts to do is essentially change all the rules of art. I mean, everything that applied in art beforehand no longer applies afterwards.
It is the quintessential work of art about art that celebrates and brings within itself all aspects of the art of painting.
This is the story of an innovative masterpiece that has become an icon and an inspiration for generations of artists. Countless pastiches and parodies have tried to make sense of this strange scene. Yet 140 years later, it remains one of the most intriguing images ever created. When Le Déjeuner-sur-l'Herbe was first thrust before a complacent public in 19th century Paris, no one knew what to make of it. It was certainly like nothing else they'd ever seen.
People liked, like they still do today, pictures that told a story, something they could understand. Manet understood that too and presents a picture which defies that. In fact, is riddled with contradictions. So you don't know what the narrative is. Paintings are supposed to, in fact, have some kind of internal logic.
The viewer is faced with an unsettling tableau. Two clothed men sit engaged in conversation with a completely naked woman in their midst. There's a picnic beside them that nobody seems to be interested in, and another woman doing something not very definite in the background water. There's no eye contact between these people, but the central naked figure gazes directly at us, in a bold and interested way. It's an oddly disjointed scene.
What's nutty is that you look at the painting, you see two men clothed, and you see this naked woman, and then you see a clothed woman in the background, and you see a boat in the background, and you see a bird up above, and you see a rather poorly, slovenly almost painted background, and you can't put it together. You think that the painting is going to deliver a story that makes sense to you, and it doesn't. It just doesn't.
The painting was originally called Le Bain, the bathing, which did at least explain the woman in the water. But within a few years, Manet retitled it Le Déjeuner-sur-l'Herbe, lunch on the grass. This was clearly no ordinary picnic. Housed today in the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, the painting first appeared in the city in 1863 at the only exhibition that mattered, the Salon, a state-sponsored event that got the whole of Paris talking.
It was the great art event of the year.
The Salon was where you met the big public, it's where you met the critics. 500,000 people a year went to see the Salon in 6 weeks. Now that is more people than go to the most popular blockbuster exhibition now.
Careers were launched at the Salon and reputations made, but there was little room for experimenting. The Salon was there to maintain the very highest standards in French art and to educate the public. Many thousands of works were submitted to a jury for approval or rejection. Invariably, the most popular pictures were grandiose mythological and historical scenes, which revered and idealized their subjects. And there were always plenty of nudes.
They were hypocritical nudes, if you like. No pubic hair, everything very smooth and sugary. Or, on the contrary, kind of nymph and satyr subjects with great wrestling female forms.
One such sugary nude was the highlight of that year's Salon, the sensation of the exhibition, The Birth of Venus by Alexandre Cabanel. The supposedly exquisite taste of this vast work was confirmed when it was purchased by the Emperor himself, Napoleon III.
You have this sort of hip shot pose with the breast thrust against the skyline with the nipple outlined so dramatically, and it's a very alluring pose, and this was what was expected from the viewers at the Salon, and everybody could say, oh well, of course I'm thinking about Venus and antiquity.
Manet is reported to have said, "They say I must paint a nude. Well, I'll give them a nude." After the Salon of 1863, the nude would never be the same again. For the Salon that year, Manet entered 3 paintings. Young Man in the Costume of a Majo, Mademoiselle Victorine in the costume of an espada, and Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe. All 3 were rejected. That could have been the end of the story, but 1863 proved to be an exceptional year. So many works were rejected that there was an outcry from the artists, and the Emperor Napoleon agreed to open an annex to the exhibition, where some of the rejected works would be displayed. The annex, known as the Salon des Refusés, became instantly notorious. It was depicted by the press as a kind of chamber of horrors. There were certainly some dreadful paintings on show, but one work stood out.
It was mass hysteria in a way. It was a sensation whipped up by the press, and it amused people to go and protest and laugh in front of it.
The Emperor himself visited the Salon des Refusés, where, according to legend, he turned away from the déjeuner in disgust. According to the reactions collected by the novelist Émile Zola, the public and the critics were equally horrified.
A common prostitute, stark naked at that, lounges shamelessly between 2 overdressed fops who look like students on holiday.
I can't think of anything uglier than the man stretched out beside her, who hasn't even thought of taking off his horrid...
How did you claim for any meaning to this uncouth riddle?
People went to stare and to laugh and to mock and to pour scorn on this character whom they imagined to be a kind of outrageous, bearded, arty fellow.
Edouard Manet was suddenly the name on everyone's lips. Surely he must be an obvious radical, a kind of artistic thug. But no. Outwardly at least, Manet seemed like one of their own.
Even when he painted, he was always very well dressed, in a top hat and his coat, sketching at the easel. And I think that that's the way that Manet was. But inside, I think there was this rebelliousness, this wanting to change.
The most controversial artist of his day was from the most bourgeois of backgrounds. Born in Paris in 1832, he was the oldest of 3 brothers. His father was an eminent judge, and his upbringing would have been the epitome of upper-middle-class respectability. Yet Manet proved unwilling to follow convention, and there is much about his life that remains curious. In the year that the Déjeuner was shown at the Salon, he married his piano teacher, Suzanne Lehenhoff. Even to his closest friends it came as a surprise.
He had this relationship that we still don't fully understand with this large, comfortable Dutchwoman. People commented on what a strange combination it was.
Suzanne had an illegitimate child, Léon, who was 11 years old when the couple married. Léon was always presented as his mother's younger brother, and the identity of the father has never been revealed. The general belief has always been that Manet must have fathered Léon. But for some reason he declined to legitimize the boy, even after his marriage to Suzanne.
He never claimed him as his son ever. I mean, I find there's something very strange about that, and perhaps it's the enigmas of Manet that keeps drawing people to him.
Manet's decision to become an artist appalled his father. For his training, he made another rebellious choice, the studio of Thomas Couture, a fashionable young painter whose style was considered innovative at the time. But Manet's training was as much in the museums as in the studio. He was a frequent visitor to the Louvre, where he registered as a copyist, recreating the work of the old masters.
In the 19th century, copying was a major part of the training, and it was something that he, as an artist, wanted to do. I mean, they were, artists are turned on by great art. It is the thing that speaks to them.
Manet was a respecter of tradition and revered the old masters. But he needed to create something new, to move on from the endless obsession with the past. He wanted the salon to change. It was time for the modern world, in all its vibrancy and colour, to take its place in art.
Manet's saying, essentially and wonderfully, our world, our people, our women, our landscape is just as important and just as pertinent to an artwork.
The painting of subjects from everyday life was an idea that had been championed by the poet Baudelaire. He urged artists to take inspiration from the ordinary man and woman in the street, and indeed the street itself, to be un peintre de la vie moderne. Embracing this notion, Manet made daily trips to the Jardin des Tuileries in Paris to sketch the throngs of people around him. To a 19th century audience, the figures in the déjeuner were startlingly modern. The two men are dressed in a slightly bohemian style, suggesting they may be students, and the woman's clothes are equally typical of the time, except that they've been discarded. All three, in fact, were well known to Manet. The central figure was posed for by his brother-in-law, Ferdinand Leenhoff, who was a sculptor. It's believed that both of Manet's younger brothers, Eugène and Gustave, posed for the reclining character on the right.
Looking at Manet's déjeuner, you would immediately have been struck that these were the sort of people you recognised wearing the sort of clothes you recognised. You imagine you might suddenly see them standing by you in the exhibition and recognise them and think, my God, that's her, my God, that's him.
But at the centre of the painting, staring boldly out at us, is an even stronger presence, Victorine Meurent. She was a professional artist's model and clearly captivated Manet. It's thought they met in 1862, and over the next 13 years Manet painted Victorine in a series of bold, exciting pictures. Another of his salon entries that year featured her in a bullfighter's costume. The poses and the costumes may have changed, but there's no mistaking Victorine's steady gaze.
She was a gorgeous model, sort of slightly red-headed, creamy skin, exactly what every artist dreams of finding in a model. It's difficult to know, isn't it? But one imagines that they must have had great fun together, working out how she would sit, how she would stand.
It's that head, those eyes, that constant look that sings out of the painting. They had something. I don't think they had anything sexual, but I think that she was a presence who interested him, and he made outrageous paintings of her.
Olympia, the portrait of her as a courtesan, reclining as if waiting to receive her next client, featured that same fixed stare that was considered so provocative. Victorine Meurent was a working-class Parisian girl who was 18 years old when she posed for Le Déjeuner sur l'Herbe.
Victorine was somebody who had posed in the studios of people that Manet knew and of his own teacher's studio. So she was a model around.
While little is known about the life of Victorine, a mythology has grown up around her. For many years, it was believed that she was an alcoholic who drank herself into an early grave.
People see what they're schooled to see and what they want to see. And Manet was the genius, and she was just the meat. But that's not the way it was. She was an interesting woman, and he painted an interesting woman.
In fact, she lived to the age of 83, and even found some success as an artist in her own right. None of her paintings has been traced, but we know the Salon accepted her work on 4 occasions.
There was even one salon where Manet showed that Victorine had a painting as well. Now that, if you think about it, that's an astounding accomplishment.
Manet's painting of Victorine was real and modern, just as Baudelaire had urged. But it was all too real for the Parisian audience.
Instead of simply using her as a model and having her turn away or look down, he used who she was. It attracted him who she was, and he painted it. And in painting it, he changed the way people, I think, ultimately painted nudes.
Yet in his quest to paint a modern nude, Manet hadn't abandoned the old masters completely. Victorine and her 2 companions are in fact a direct quotation from a work that Manet radically updated. The Judgment of Paris by Marc-Antonio Raimondi is a 16th century engraving that is itself a copy of an original piece by Raphael. In the bottom right-hand corner of this mythological scene sit a water nymph and 2 river gods who were observing the selection of the most beautiful women in the world, a process that may well have reminded Manet of the Salon and its critical jury.
The Marc-Antonio Raimondi print after Raphael was a very well-known print. It was used by other artists. Many artists had reproductions of it in their studios. So therefore Manet turning to that would have been absolutely appropriate. The thievery that he played upon it, however, is really uniquely his own.
And the classical quotations go further. The idea of combining 2 clothed men with 2 naked women is thought to have come from another 16th century Italian masterpiece, the Pastoral Concert by Titian. In this scene, the 2 men are dressed in contemporary clothing and seem unaware of the 2 naked women alongside them. But here, the women are nymphs, mythological figures who are naturally naked. The painting was one of the treasures of the Louvre, where Manet would undoubtedly have seen it. According to Antonin Proust, Manet's friend and biographer, he wanted to do his own modern version of the Titian, depicting real people.
With Manet, what you get is the reality. These were the nudes that were posing in the studio. He gives it to us like they were. She looks like she needs to work out at the spa and do more exercising. And they didn't like that aspect about her because they couldn't then use the painting as a kind of an escape to an idealized world.
What it achieved was a kind of scrubbing away of the hypocrisy, the pretense that the studio model was Venus, was a nymph. He just showed that she was a model, and this was a breakthrough. This was a breakthrough.
To paint a nude was considered a major technical challenge, and evidence of an artist's true abilities. X-rays of the déjeuner reveal how the nude became the focal point of Manet's canvas.
The central element of this composition, even though it's off-centre, is clearly the nude. I mean, everything points towards her, the gestures of the men, the line of the hand and the cane, even the figure up the top is bringing your eye back down to this larger, lighter shape.
The figure of Victorine has evidently been reworked in great detail. The face in particular seems to have been laboured over, And it may be that Victorine was not Manet's original model. Since they only met in 1862, it could be that the painting was started with a different sitter, Manet's wife.
It is possible that it began with this large Dutch lady, Suzanne, and was then transformed into the more elegant form, perhaps, of Victorine.
The X-rays also show an interesting omission. The pile of clothes in the foreground is missing, which means that they were painted in at a later stage. Manet's original nude was more in keeping with tradition.
It was quite apparent that he had taken this very radical decision to transform the woodland nymph into a very modern young lady who had taken off her fashionable dress and her sun hat and left them on the grass beside her. And in a sense, this is what gives the picture its shock value. And I just think it's so interesting to see that this was a decision that he made right in the final stages of completing his picture.
Manet emphasized this nakedness in the way that he lit his model. The traditional technique was to use a sidelight, creating subtle shadings over the areas of flesh and emphasizing their noble roundedness. Manet chose a direct light from the front, much less flattering, and less comfortable in its connotations.
The way that Manet uses the light in his picture does suggest that kind of investigatory quality, the figure exposed under a spotlight for close scrutiny, which might be medical, might be scientific, but it's certainly highly moralistic.
Manet systematically broke all the conventions that had governed 19th century art. Within this one frame, all of the art establishment's expectations were flouted and travestied. For one thing, the painting was clearly too big.
It was not an off-the-rack canvas, so he made a conscious decision to choose a size that was going to meet his ambition.
The established rules of French art specified a hierarchy of subjects, and the bigger the canvas, the more important the subject. Paintings this size were usually grand historical works commemorating noble events or religious dramas. A canvas of these dimensions had certainly never been devoted to a picnic. In other ways, too, the picture defied categorization. Slotting it into any one genre was impossible since it contained elements of several: still life, landscape, and figure painting.
It was a challenge to an artist to prove that he or she was a universal artist who could do all the genres, could actually be master of the whole range of different types of subject matter. And in a sense, Manet's trying to do the whole lot all at the same time.
The tastes of the time required the artist to leave as little evidence of brushwork as possible. The illusion should be perfect.
The viewer wanted to tiptoe over the surface of the painting and not be at all disturbed by what they were seeing on the very surface of the painting when they looked at a salon painting. They were varnished, they were polished, the brushstrokes were invisible.
Manet's style was completely different. Instead of subtle shading and grading, the paint was applied in thick blocks of colour that leapt out of the canvas.
It actually appeared raw and unfinished. It seemed to have been left at the stage of a sketch or a study, even though it was on a very large scale.
Parts of the painting are hardly more than blobs of colour. At a time when precise artistic skill was prized above all else, this was a bold departure. It was also an effect that Manet worked hard to achieve.
The repetition of a painted area through scraping down and reworking gives the illusion of directness and immediacy, whereas in fact it's quite a long and labour-intensive process.
In a bold break with the past, Manet was letting the viewers see the hand of the artist and foregrounding his craft, his technique. This was now art about art. And just as the brushstrokes and heavy use of paint remind us of the artist's hand, Manet finds other ways of saying that this is a painting done in a studio, and not a real outdoor scene at all. The man on the right, for instance, is wearing a smoking cap that would normally have been worn indoors. And the woodland itself is painted like a theatrical backdrop, with an unnatural, flattened perspective.
You're just not as sure as you should be where the beginning is, where the middle is, and where the distance is. And you see it most obviously with this figure in the back of the woman coming out of the water, because she's the wrong side, isn't she? If she was genuinely being presented with the right perspective, she would be much smaller, but she's too big. So this strange landscape not only lures you into thinking about the drama more obviously, but I think it just says strangeness, it implies strangeness, it sort of demands that you think about it differently.
Even details such as the picnic are unrealistic on closer inspection, and merely add to the sense of artifice.
The picnic in the foreground is really odd, because it isn't a picture of a real picnic either before, during or after. You've got one solitary bread roll spilling out onto the wet ground, you've got some figs, you've possibly got some mussel shells, and you've got some cherries, which of course from a different season than figs. It's a strange spread of fruit and odd bits and pieces that we don't really know what it's doing there.
In fact, the more you look, the more oddness and contrivance you find.
The fact that you can't fit the figures together to make some sort of clear sense out of them and create a storyline is something that gives you an immediate challenge, but it's also something that's absolutely in line with notions about what it was to be modern at that time, that modernity was something that didn't all add up, didn't all make sense.
Most disquietingly of all, this was no longer art from which viewers could hold themselves aloof. They were included in it.
The central key person in that picture is the viewer of the picture. Because the woman on the left, the naked woman, is turned around towards you. She is directly looking at you, very openly, very immediately. Her body language says, I recognize you. She's not displaying herself provocatively. She's not covering herself up. She's simply looking at you as if to say, you're part of the party.
Like all the other nudes then so prevalent in art, Manet's display of female flesh was aimed at men, but this time not for their gratification. This nude's accusing look would have unsettled those many middle-class gentlemen of the day who would have kept a mistress, or visited prostitutes as a matter of course.
She is saying to them, yes, I'm here. I'm the kind of woman that you, in your spare time, go to. Does Madame next to you, sir, know that I'm here? It's an image that fights a fight for all those women who were kept hidden from Madame the wife, but who were there.
There can be little doubt that Manet himself took advantage of these sexual double standards. At the age of 46, he contracted syphilis, a common complaint of the day, and a disease that he certainly didn't catch from his wife, Suzanne. If you look closely enough, there's a tiny detail in the painting that could be Manet's coded comment on this matter.
Very, very many people simply don't notice it until you point it out, and then they say, oh my God, yes, of course it's a frog. At that time, a frog, a grenouille, is a slang for a prostitute, and there you have, in the bottom left-hand corner, this little green creature, looking rather sternly in the opposite direction from all the action behind it.
From the oversized canvas to the smallest painted detail, le déjeuner sur l'herbe confused people and unsettled them. It was the start of a whole new chapter in art, but not everyone was ready for it.
They found the style, the lack of finish, the frontal lighting, all virtually impossible, as well as the subject matter, to tolerate. But they did recognise the quality of his painting. They saw him as a misguided genius.
He knew about colour, he knew about the viscousness of paint and how to apply it. But he frustrated them because he wasn't conforming to the rules.
Le déjeuner sur l'herbe was on sale at the Salon show, but nobody bought it. The critics had a field day, though some perceived that Manet was ahead of his time.
Manet will triumph one day, we do not doubt, over all the obstacles he encounters, and we will be the first to applaud his success.
Manet is one of the greatest artistic figures of the day. In this salon, he is its sparkle, its inspiration, its flavour, its marvel.
This is a major, ambitious picture, and it therefore clearly set him down as someone who wanted to challenge history and leave his mark on it.
He wanted the system to change, to modernise. He sought consistently throughout his life to get salon acceptance, but it was on his terms. It had to be on his terms.
Among the younger artists, the picture created huge excitement, becoming a touchstone for the avant-garde. Manet was seen not just as the challenger of the accepted tradition, but its successful liberator. The Impressionists, the most progressive group of artists of their day, adopted him as their leader, and their most famous member, Claude Monet, attempted his own version of Le Déjeuner just 2 years later in 1865. His aim was to create something even more modern and believable on a vast scale. His canvas was 20 feet long, but the project proved too ambitious and he never completed it. Only fragments of the work have survived, though a sketch exists to reveal Monet's vision.
The huge picture, if he'd ever finished it, would have been 15 by 20 feet, even bigger than Manet. But at the same time, Monet is just painting a picnic. There's nothing about the subject that's problematic. It just is a gigantic modern picture of a picnic.
Manet himself did 2 more versions of the Déjeuner, one incomplete in watercolours and ink, and another in oils which now hangs in London's Courtauld Institute. It's only half the dimensions of the original, and was probably painted to commission for someone wanting a domestic-sized copy. Meanwhile, the ideas expressed by the painting continued to attract the greatest names in art. In 1870, Cézanne painted several versions, noticeably maintaining the clothed men with nude women. He's also thought to have inserted himself into the picture. With works such as Le Déjeuner, Manet had opened up new directions in painting. And to the end of his life, he was seen as the leader of those young artists who gathered round him, attracted by his scandalous reputation. But Manet never saw himself as part of any school. His career as an artist lasted barely 20 years. The syphilis he contracted at 46 gradually took hold, and eventually his left leg was black with gangrene and had to be amputated. The operation took place in the sitting room of his apartment. Manet never recovered and died there 10 days later on April 30th, 1883, at the age of 51. He's buried at Passy Cemetery in the heart of Paris. His friend and fellow artist Edgar Degas followed the funeral procession and remarked, "He was greater than we thought." As the 20th century dawned, Le Déjeuner was still a beacon, leading on the next generation of radical artists. In 1900 it was shown at the Universal Exposition of Paris, where it was seen by Picasso.
There at the Universal Exposition, he sees for the first time this amazing work, the Déjeuner sur l'herbe. Now it's only 40 years old. It would be like an artist today coming to New York and looking at an early work, an early pop art painting.
Picasso once scribbled on a piece of paper, "Whenever I see the Déjeuner, I think to myself, that's trouble for later on." It was nearly 60 years later in his life, when Picasso was in his 80s, that he took on the Déjeuner. For 3 years it obsessed him, inspiring the largest series of variations on one original that Picasso ever produced. 150 drawings, 27 paintings, 3 lino cuts, and 18 cardboard models from which sculptures were made.
Picasso was painting a series that in a way, the end of the period of modern art. And so it was appropriate that he would go back to the original work of modern art, the wellspring, what launched the whole adventure, and to go back to both celebrate it and to draw inspiration from it.
Over the course of the series, Picasso played around with the foursome, creating different scenarios. But his particular fascination was with the central nude.
Picasso said to Braque one day, I want to paint a woman or create a woman or sculpt a woman who you can actually smell her, you can feel her, you know the tone of her voice. And that's what he got out of Manet. In these endless variations he does, he suggests certain eventualities. He puzzled, he went round and round all these different possibilities until suddenly when he's relinquished the whole series, he goes back to it one last time and turns it into a rape. And suddenly, genitalia all over the place, and it ends with a bang and a crash.
Picasso saw himself as a kind of Manet figure, just as Manet was to the art of his time, the updater of tradition, so was Picasso.
Exactly 100 years after Le Déjeuner appeared, the pop artist Alain Jacquet took on the painting. The original work of art about art was an obvious choice for a new generation of artists exploring the paradoxes of originality and mass reproduction. Jacquet began with a photograph of his adapted scene, then reproduced the image on canvas using a screen printing process, and enlarging the picture to the point where the image was reduced to a series of dots. Just as Manet had made his brushstrokes visible, Jacquet too was giving the technical process within the picture an exaggerated exposure.
What I wanted to do with the photo screen is just to flatten the whole thing. So, I was putting everything on a two-dimensional surface. I was flattening the perspective. And also, it was a painting that it was impossible to perceive, because if you go too close, you don't see anything. And if you go further away, you get everything, but you have a kind of blurring.
What copying had been to the history of Manet's picture, industrial reproduction became for Jacquet's image.
I was using a medium that was done for reproduction, so I thought it was stupid just to do one. And at the same time, I thought it was a really interesting idea to do maybe the opposite, of Mona Lisa, where everybody has to go to one place, to see it. Like here, you could have it in every country, in every museum.
In 1981, the painting finally entered the mainstream of popular culture thanks to a pop group, Bow Wow Wow.
I think we made people more aware of the original painting because of our album cover, The Last of the Mohicans, and Go Wild, See Jungle, Go Johnny Oganyo, City All Over, Go Crazy. I think we actually put it out there.
The band's producer, Malcolm McLaren, wanted lots of publicity for the band's first album and commissioned a version of The Déjeuner set in Surrey.
He came up and he said, this is what I want to do. 100 years ago, when it came out, it was controversial, it all got rejected. There was the whole, explaining the whole story of the painting.
In the post-punk days of the music industry, it would be difficult to create a stir with a 19th century work of art. But McLaren pulled it off.
I agreed to do it after a lot of discussion. Malcolm saying, it's going to be fantastic because you're going to be the first singer to ever done something like this for an album cover. It's going to be beautiful, beautiful. The cherries are going to be all in the right place, the oranges, the tangerines. It's going to be fantastic, Annabelle. You're just going to look like a work of art. The shock value at the time was that I was, 14, and I was really concerned that my mother would go ape crazy.
In fact, that's exactly what happened. And worse still, she demanded that all the photographs be handed over immediately.
I then got a call from Malcolm saying, quick, get the pictures out of the way because the police were involved. And they said, that they were going to be coming round to get the pictures off me because I've been taking photographs of a minor. And I thought, oh, blooming heck, if this is, pop photography, forget it.
The pictures were leaked to the press, and the déjeuner became embroiled in yet another scandal. The cover was later released, and has been named as one of the best album covers ever produced. McLaren had used the painting to create the controversy he wanted, but only by exploiting the tableau at its most obvious level. An image aimed so clearly at men of the 19th century has inevitably provoked a critique from women artists of the 20th century.
When I first saw Manet's version of it, and the two gentlemen were clad in their clothing of the time, I felt there was sort of a tension there, because it was like, why is this woman there like naked, and these two guys are sort of lounging around, which is every guy's fantasy, but I couldn't really get with it. So once I discovered the River Gods and I saw the River God version of it, I sort of embraced that more, because I sort of feel more like the queen, if you want. It's like I'm in charge, and these guys are there to like protect me. For me, it's about changing people's ideas and notions of how they previously thought. That's like the greatest part of being an artist and putting work out there, that it provokes some kind of conversation.
This view is really great from here. What's going on here?
Maybe a little more than a picnic.
What were they contemplating?
I don't quite get the point. No, not that obvious. Those are two painters, say, and she's a model. They have a lunch break.
This gives it another dimension.
You think so?
Oh yeah. I think you have more, you can see right up there. I think she's having a ménage à trois here.
In a leafy corner of New Jersey, a version of the déjeuner has been created by one of America's most popular sculptors.
3D has this power, and I thought if I took something that already had power, a two-dimensional icon, and give it the third dimension, that would do something, and it does. I get postcards from Paris all the time saying, all these people standing there looking at the painting, they haven't seen it from the back. There's a sense of being there, there's a sense of going through the looking glass, so there's all kinds of things that happen that are quite disturbing, actually. It's almost like this is the real thing, and that's a painting of this, and so authenticity and everything like that becomes garbled, and that's fun.
She thought at first that he might be, the sculptor might have been imitating a famous painting.
The painting, because it looks like
and I don't know if it's a famous painting.
People sort of, think, shake their head and try to figure out what the hell's going on. And they're allowed to touch it, which you, of course, are not allowed anywhere near Déjeuner sur l'Herbe. And with the nude, I have a feeling that she gets touched a lot.
And she's playing that innocent look. Look at her face. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's about forcing people to ask questions. I think that Manet had a little devil in him, and he just had fun twisting people's knickers.
There are many, many more dramatic subjects than four people sitting around on the banks of a river. But it's precisely this understatement that has given this image legs. It's precisely because it isn't easy to just dismiss it as a piece of shock that it has maintained the whole of it has an
It's 25 years since I made The Shock of the New, a set of 8 visual essays on the relationship of painting, sculpture and architecture to some of the great cultural issues of the last 100 years. A personal view of modern art in the 20th century. I was trying to tell the story of how art has always attempted to stay one step ahead of the game, defining who we were, what it meant to live in the time in which we lived, and what the future, however bold and however shocking it could be, might hold. But now, with the 20th century over, and living in a culture where anything and everything goes, I think it's a good moment to reassess at least some of the claims of modern art, and add a final chapter examining what you could say was good and what was bad, and why it's important to know the difference. Today, newness in art doesn't seem to matter so much because it's expected, it's museum policy, it's routine. Maybe the shock of the new simply doesn't matter anymore. But in that case, it's become all the more important to decide for yourself whether a work of art is just a little feat of novelty or whether it actually has something fresh and vital to say. Just over 100 years ago, the world was amazed by the sight of the Eiffel Tower peering strangely above the skyline of Paris. Wherever you went in the city, you couldn't escape the sight of the tower. It was visible from everywhere. This was the master image of the age, a structure that seemed to express the energy, the confidence, and the self-belief that art could offer. And the important thing was that it had a mass audience. Millions of people, residents and visitors, were touched by the feeling of a new age that the tower made real. years later, when the Twin Towers went up in the 1970s New York, people didn't think the same way about that. 40,000 square feet of office space confirmed that business was good, and that Lower Manhattan was steadily usurping the square mile in London as the centre of the world's financial markets. It said something else too, but which we took for granted. In their gross confidence, the Twin Towers were an emblem of a society content with itself and with the world, and seemingly unassailable. So nothing on September 10th, 2001 could have prepared us for those hijacked planes heading toward the World Trade Center on the following morning, and the shock of its collapse. I saw it from the window of my loft, the great unfurling disintegration, the toppling, the unbelievable quality of catastrophe. Replayed a million times, the fall of the towers has become one of the iconic images of the 20th century. To anyone with a biblical background, it also suggests the fall of the Tower of Babel. I guess we're all apt to generalise, but it's not hard to see the erection of the Eiffel Tower as the beginning of a modern age, and the death of the Twin Towers as its terrible end. The fall of the World Trade Center immediately entered that small stock of images by which we remember the horror and cruelty and violence of the 20th century. The atomic bomb, the death camps at the end of the Second World War, the assassination of JFK. Thinking of these events, I sometimes wonder why so few of them have been depicted by contemporary artists. And I try to imagine what the great painters of the past might have made of them. Howard Turner had painted the mushroom cloud. Howard Goya had depicted the liberation of Belsen. Or David shown the assassination of Kennedy. There was a time when art had a lot to say about the world and its events. As recently as 1937, after all, Picasso had been able to paint the most powerful invective against violence in modern art, Guernica. It was inspired by an act of war, the bombing of a Basque town during the Spanish Civil War by German aircraft at the request of the Spanish nationalist commander, General Emilio Mola. Guernica may not have been the last great history painting, but it was surely the last modern painting of major importance that took its subject from politics with the intention of changing the way that large numbers of people thought and felt about power. A reproduction of it was given to the United Nations and hung in its foyer in New York to remind everyone of the horrors of war. But we're a long way from the moral shock of that now. In January 2003, when Colin Powell came to the United Nations to argue the case for war in Iraq, Guernica was discreetly covered with a blue curtain. We don't do art like this anymore. And today, the most controversial works of art do not tell so much of the horrors of war, but of the artist's own personal phobias. You only have to go to a big survey show of contemporary art, like the Whitney Biennial in New York, to see that it's all become rather bloated. Artists seeking to make an impact with an instant hit, anything to stand out from the crowd, anything that says, look, here I am, I have arrived, I am different. Whatever it is, it's about making an immediate impact. about fast, gettable and sellable images. Shit, man, this is what they used to do in Notting Hill Gate in 1964. Trouble is, you know, if you live long enough and you're in a culture of revivals, in the end nothing is new. It's as though Western art began with Andy Warhol.
In this atmosphere, artists are treated like stars. Social glamour is the criterion for star quality.
Andy Warhol did more than any other artist to turn the art world into the art business. Although his late work descended into feeble, repetitious kitsch, the main message of his career came through very loud and very clear. And it was that the primary model of art was fashion. His paintings, tremendously stylish in their rough silk screening, mimic the dissociation of gaze and empathy induced by the mass media. The banal punch of tabloid newsprint, the visual jabber and the bright sleazy colours of TV, the sense of glut and anaesthesia caused by both. Two Elvises are better than one, and one Marilyn, patched like a gaudy stamp on a ground of gold leaf, could become a sly and grotesque parody of the Virgin Mary fixations of Warhol's own Catholic childhood, of the pretentious enlargement of media stars by secular culture, and of the similarities between both. I want to be a machine, said Andy. Well, he didn't quite succeed in this high ambition, probably no artist can, but he did leave this strange legacy whereby artists who came after him engaged obsessively in the production of serial novelties. Today, the closest thing to Warhol's factory with its army of assistants is the studio of Jeff Koons. I wanted to meet Koons because he is probably the most famous living artist in America. Born in Philadelphia in 1955, Koons started very young by rearranging the items in the window of his father's shop. He financed his art by earning money as a commodity trader on the New York Stock Exchange and began his artistic career by putting consumer items in plexiglass boxes. Anything from vacuum cleaners to basketballs. A trick he'd learnt from Marcel Duchamp, an artist who made his name with ready-made sculpture in the teens and 20s of the last century. In the mid-1980s, Koons concentrated on reproducing stainless steel model trains that had once contained Jim Beam whiskey. He dabbled in a laundered and winsome kind of pornography after his marriage to the Italian politician and porn star Cicciolina with a series called Made in Heaven. He then duplicated advertising images of luxury goods, directing his assistants to paint exact replicas for a purpose that I've never really been able to fathom. Like Warhol, he hooks onto the ad mass imagery of an age and tries to turn it into iconography. His statues of subjects like the Pink Panther are kitschified into porcelain like enlarged souvenirs. He uses the same technique with religion, such as this copy from Leonardo, a statue of John the Baptist, as though his work and Leonardo's were in some sense one and the same. Religion has diminished into celebrity, the kind of reverse apotheosis made most clearly in his sculpture of Michael Jackson and his pet monkey, Bubbles.
I saw Michael at the time as somebody that really would do anything for his art, somebody that was just transforming himself. He wanted a large audience, and at the same time, the public seemed so hungry for this too. Michael really was a symbol of the kind of the celebrity culture and everything that we look to that culture for. I mean, this deals with kind of this Christ-like quality of, putting somebody in this type of situation.
Well, here he is saving the soul of this little lady.
Well, I think it has to do with a sense of evolution and a sense of eternity. But I think there's tragedy in this piece, and I think the tragedy was always there. There was tragedy of what Michael was doing to himself. There's always this tragedy of how culture looks to the celebrity. I was really thinking about Renaissance sculpture. I was thinking about the Vatican and how the Vatican's used art, and this is within that tradition. But I was thinking of Michelangelo and the Pieta.
Hughes' act, which is not perhaps even an act, is to believe that he is a natural descendant of the great artists of the past, interpreting religious iconography with a kind of contemporary twist, but aspiring to the same level of eternal fame and truth. Perhaps if you mention your name in the same sentence as Michelangelo's, people will begin to see you in the same light. And if you then go to Italy and hire lots of craftsmen to work for you using the same materials, then you can start taking yourself even more seriously.
I saw Masaccio's Expulsion, and that was really kind of the genesis of the Made in Heaven work. I was really moved by the Expulsion, and I guess I felt...
But the Expulsion is a deeply pessimistic, even tragic image. I mean, here are these people, Adam and Eve, who have just lost everything. They've lost all their sources of happiness. They're being thrown out. What relation does that have to yours?
Well, with humankind, I mean, we're in that state since that moment, and to deal with that state. And so people have guilt and shame, and my work has dealt with guilt and shame for a long time.
Sex is a fairly common theme in Hughes' work. Sometimes it's moderately subtle, sometimes it's quite explicit, and at other times it's rather confusing. A woman in a bath with the top of her head cut off, surprised by an underwater diver with a snorkel.
I tried to relate that cultural guilt and shame to guilt and shame that people have about masturbation. And most young children come in contact with their bodies when they take a bath.
And do both of these come together in this girl as a masturbation image and in covering her breasts?
Well, it's kind of different. I mean, the sense of the bathtub's there. The guilt and shame is, I think, that the viewer feels too, because I think you want to participate, the viewer, in the victimization that's happening here. I mean, she's startled, she's trying to protect herself, but yet, this finish here, it's so sensitive. I mean, I want to touch the hands, I want to touch her arm. And so it has that sense of quality that the medium, kind of this victimizer role that's taking place here.
But the voyeur or interferer or whatever he is actually is also cut off, isn't he? I mean, there's no way that he could fit in there.
That's correct. I guess maybe this is us. That's underneath there in the snorkel.
Today, Hughes and his assistants are working on a series of large children's toys, playing with materials, inflating dogs and lobsters, and then recasting them in aluminium so that they acquire weight and a sort of gravitas. Nobody questions the work because Hughes' lock on the market is so thorough. His Woman in a Tub sold for $1.7 million, the Pink Panther for $1.8 million, the train of whiskey bottles for $5 million. Over the last 25 years, I've been amazed at the rise in prices and the sheer volume of the art market. $100 million for a Picasso removes the work from public currency. It says, look, I can belong only to the super rich, and all other Picassos are just the same. This alienation of the work from the common viewer is actually a form of spiritual vandalism, a cultural obscenity. What on earth is going on? Theo Westreich runs an advisory service for collectors, assessing value amidst the hype and telling you, the neophyte, who is hot, who is not, and why art has become such a popular investment for collectors.
The reality of collecting, the desire to own, the desire to behold, the desire to learn, the desire to have, never changed. We have an enormously rich history of collecting. What's different now is that the nature of collecting has changed only because there are more people who can play in the market.
Why do they want to?
It's sexy. It's fun. It's engaging. It's fast-paced. It's opportunistic. It's about your culture and your time. You understand it. You can embrace it. It confers value on you, the collector, to have objects that other people perceive as important, valuable, critical.
Art does not need to make an immediate impact to have value. It could be troubling and yet still bear repeated viewings. And you can find this slow disclosure in the work of Paula Rego, an artist who is psychically tense without being melodramatic. I think she's the best painter of women's experience alive today. Her paintings contain narratives that don't always show themselves at once. The work is subtle, puzzling, discreet, and undermining. Things are not always explicit. Things are not always what they seem. Paula Rego tells stories, fairy tales, fables, plays, parables, and the folklore with which she grew up. But it's a psychic narrative, laced with stories from the confessional, the psychiatrist's couch, and her own bad dreams.
I think that all paintings, ever since they began to be paintings, were about stories. All stories give an explanation for the world. They all give a face, they all make sense of the world. They all make, in their way, they make sense of the world. And the violence in the world, which there is plenty of, you see also in the folk tale. So it makes sense of the world. It condenses it and gives it a form and makes it much more acceptable to see.
Rego's paintings draw on memories of her childhood, a world of dark secrets, compromise and betrayal, a murky mythology in which the public and the private interweave in love and family life. Paula Rego is not that interested in what Americans call family values, but she's fascinated by the truth of families as a source of conflict. When there are two people or more in a Rego, you can be quite sure that something rather bad is going to happen to at least one of them. You very often seem to deal with childhood memories that you find repulsive, and then you work through them.
Yes.
Has painting always been a means towards doing that?
It's always been a means of doing things I couldn't do any other way. So you can do things in pictures that you can't do in life, ever.
Her childhood in Portugal was coloured by growing up under a military dictatorship. A work such as this, The Interrogator's Garden, shows a guilt-free fascist in rubber gardening gloves, a torturer, perhaps a rapist, a man confident of his own unassailable position in a society gone wrong that demeans women, bans dissent, and outlaws free speech. Her painting, The Policeman's Daughter, brings home the ruthlessness of a world where childhood is compromised and made sexual. The Policeman's Daughter.
Yeah.
This picture of a girl lovingly shining her father's jackboot, one of the main symbols of oppressive authority of the 20th century, clearly has a very great political resonance for you.
Her devotion to her father is not necessarily political, although she is certainly a very obedient girl and likes to do what her father asks her. I think it's more that kind. If that is political, then it is political. But it has to do with obedience and being very well brought up.
But the Policeman's Daughter also seems to me to carry a very powerful image of incest too.
Probably.
Only probably?
I mean, it wasn't intentioned at the time. I mean, I didn't think, oh, this is incest, but I think probably yes. My daughter, who was posing for me, she was wiping, and I said, darling, just ram your fist down the boot.
Ah.
Right? And that's how it happened.
Mm-hmm.
I just told her, just ram your fist down there. And she did. And
like a good daughter?
Like a good daughter, yeah. I mean, she was okay, you know, so it worked.
These are ambitious pictures, deeply engaged with the relationships people have with each other, with their imagination and with their pasts. Has there ever been a time when you didn't think of your art in terms of a wider kind of social address?
Oh, I never do think of it as a wide kind of social address.
Yeah, but you're not a simple painter who paints, say, still lives.
No, I don't know how to do, no.
You're always
I can't see
painting
the
human
point.
situations.
Yes, I am. A fight, a power play.
Power.
Who bullies whom and all this, and the injustices that go on. I mean, there's a whole series I did on abortion pictures, for instance, which were political pictures with a message, you know, straightforward message. And they were done because I wanted to do something about it, you see.
In Portugal, abortion is still a crime, and these images show the consequences of people seeking backstreet abortions. The images are not sensational for sensation's sake. They're real and have a haunting impact. Rago's art makes it very clear that painting, in order to be contemporary, does not need to be about glitz or surface or media references, and that painting can actually have something to say, even though that something may not be immediately agreeable. Some of the most moving art that deals with this tension between private conscience and public responsibility has emerged from Germany. I decided to go to Berlin because it's this city that has most embodied the troubled nature of the 20th century. The oscillation between decadence and social collapse, 2 world wars, the Holocaust, the forced acceptance but the eventual rejection of communism, the fall of the Berlin Wall, a city soaked in the drama and chaos of history. But should the artist deal with such a history? How much should be remembered and how much cast aside? Should he or she forget it all as though nothing had happened, as if that were possible? Or should he confront questions of memory, identity and nationality and test the moral imagination, his own and others? The artist Anselm Kiefer has had the courage and perhaps even the looniness to tackle it head on. In 1969 he produced the first of his books, some of which show him repeatedly giving the Nazi salute. He wanted to understand both the attractive and the corrosive nature of power. Kiefer probes deeply into the roots of German history and identity. His ambition ranges across myth and history and fiction, from the legend of Parsifal to the architecture of Albert Speer. This painting is called Monument to an Unknown Artist, but of course the unknown artist is Hitler. Kiefer's work covers an enormous terrain of cultural reference and pictorial techniques, and in the process he's tried to shoulder the content of tragic history and redemptive hope that so much recent art has tended either to trivialise or ignore. His use of materials gives his work power and resonance, whether it's names and numbers on bits of paper, or toy aeroplanes, or children's clothes. And these come together in a series of pictures that commemorate the most infamous event in German history, the Holocaust. Years ago, Anselm Kiefer was attacked by some Germans as a neo-Nazi. On the other hand, the State of Israel has honoured him for his depictions of the Holocaust. The most humanly poignant cluster of images in his work is based upon a poem by Paul Celan, who wrote it in a concentration camp, and it's called Death Fugue. Death is a master from Germany. His eye is blue, he strikes you with leaden bullets. His aim is true. A man lives in the house, your golden hair, Margareta. He sets his hounds upon us. He grants us a grave in the air. He plays with the serpents and dreams. Death is a master from Germany, your golden hair, Margareta, your ashen hair, Shulamit. Margareta, the blonde personification of ideal German womanhood, and Shulamit, the cremated Jewess who is also the archetypal beloved of the Song of Solomon, interweave in Kiefer's work in a haunting and oblique way. Neither is actually seen as a figure. Margareta's presence, like a motif in music, is signalled by long wisps of golden straw, while Shulamit's emblem is charred substance and black shadow. What can I remember? What should I remember? These questions run through Kiefer's work from the very beginning. His art sets itself against the sterile irony and the sense of trivial pursuit that infest our culture. It affirms the moral imagination. Today, history is hard to keep in mind as we struggle to keep up with the barrage of information that assails us. We are now exposed to more images in a day than anyone in the 14th century would have known in a lifetime. We're surrounded by the fuzz and rumble of endless imagery, the white noise of everyday life, signals of information and desire that blur into each other, punctuated only by the bright highlights and sudden shouts of images that cut through the chaos. Most of it is garbage. Most of it needs excising, even if we're fearful that we might be missing something. We're probably not. We have to discard. We have to throw things away, cleanse the doors of our perception and work out what is worth looking at, what is worth remembering, What are the images that matter? What will we retain? An artist who knows the contemporary world, but also seems to know what to filter out of it. An artist who has been radical by turning away from the chaos to pursue the beautiful is David Hockney. Fashionable and glamorous in the 70s and 80s, Hockney was, in a sense, but only in a sense, England's answer to Andy Warhol. With sun, sex and swimming pools, it was clear from the start that Hockney would have made a contemporary illustrator of genius. But he was much more than that. With his wiry line that defined shape while subliminally conveying its depth and weight, with his unfailing instinct for placement, he knew just where the metallic fronds of a poem should pop up in paint, and just how effective the restrained simplicity of a blue pool, a pink building, a blue sky, and a splash of water could evoke an endless summer afternoon. A bigger splash remains the quintessential Los Angeles painting. The splash itself, in its strands, hatchings and squiggles of white, is a masterpiece of stylization. It shows how even beauty can be radical. Then Hockney turned to photography. Distrusting the single image stare of the camera lens, he took to fragmenting each scene or motif by taking hundreds of images of it and then constructing a semi-cubist patchwork out of these shifting, overlapping views. It was an attempt to put time back into photography, the darting look of the painter's eye. In the end, I'm not sure that this was the best part of his work. In any case, now he's turned 180 degrees and he's come out the other side, returning to drawing and painting and creating some of the simplest and most restrained images of his career. You can see how far he's travelled back by looking at images of his mother in paint, in photography, and then in simple brush and wash. Today he's working in watercolours, painting directly without prior underdrawing, with as few brushstrokes as possible. Elegance, simplicity, restraint, whether it be summer rain or the garden outside his studio or a sketchbook of recent work in southern Spain. Let's have a look at some of these landscapes you've been working on. This is the sketchbook, one of the sketchbooks you start from, is it?
I went to Andalusia.
Oh, there we are, we're in Cordoba.
Cordoba.
Yeah, that's the great mosque in Cordoba.
Yeah.
Looks like an orchard, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Palm grove. Fabulous
Yes.
palm grove. I thought it was incredibly beautiful. Courtyard in Seville.
Right.
Beginning to see the patterns
Yes.
that happened. This is then at the Alhambra, this is the Charles V's palace.
Oh, right, yes.
The,
Are you moving directly with the brush, or do you use any, I don't see any pencil underdrawing?
No, just brush.
No, just brush.
No,
Okay.
pencil, yeah. I just used a brush. I just had a big brush. The first thing I draw are these lines.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that what you'd see
is just
early on are just grey lines. You're simplifying, you're making, how do I make the space? But I deliberately, as I said, just took a big brush, 4 colours, and you start seeing. I didn't want to look through a camera. I looked through cameras for a long time.
You did? Yeah.
Yes, I did. And in the end, you're more aware of what's at the edges, what's not there. it's forced to be a certain kind of picture. I mean, that's Cordoba. I thought it was unphotographable, actually, in a way.
Well, you're pretty much right. I know I've tried to photograph that in my amateurish way, and it just comes out looking like a mess.
Yeah. Also, when you're there, you notice the marvellous patterns that photography doesn't quite show you the way you see them. Your eye sees the way different surfaces have these patterns on. You don't get the thrill of this magnificent ceiling that's like, it's like walking over a fantastic palm grove, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. But this kind of drawing is a feat of memory and concentration, of keeping the eye alive, of retaining curiosity. Now Hockney's returning to East Yorkshire to look again at the landscape of his childhood.
And I worked on the land in East Yorkshire, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Harvesting.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. From school.
Oh my God, you're the little boy in the corner of the constable.
Yes, I was stooping cod. I was in Yorkshire driving from Bridlington to Wetherby all the time. And I got fascinated. There's no hedges. It's big like the western United States. You can see a long way.
Just goes on forever.
You can see a long, long way. I might be using memory from 10 minutes past, but I'm also using memory from 50 years past. Yeah. You paint it. You pick up big brushes. You paint it. I can now do that with incredible confidence. That
Well, you should be able to. You were born there, you brought up there.
Yeah. But you do it in painting.
Yeah.
You cannot photograph this. Yeah. It's not the same. It has to be painted. Fascinating.
Well, there you go, David. You've got your work cut out once
Yes,
again.
I have a big project. I have a big project coming up, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you've always got a big project
Yeah,
coming up. It's called The World, mate.
Yes.
In the 45 years that I've been writing about art, there's been a tragic depreciation in the traditional skills of painting and drawing, the nuts and bolts of the profession. In part, it's been caused by the assumption that photography and its cognate media, film and television, tell the most truth about the visual. This is not true. The camera, if it's lucky, may tell a different truth to drawing, but not necessarily a truer one. Painting and drawing bring us into a different, a deeper, and more fully experienced relation to the object. We have had a gutful of fast art and fast food. What we need more of is slow art, art that holds time as a vase holds water. Art that grows out of modes of perception and making, whose skill and doggedness make you think and feel. Art that isn't merely sensational, that doesn't get its message across in 10 seconds, that isn't falsely iconic, that hooks onto something deep running in our natures. In a word, art that is the very opposite of mass media. Lucian Freud's world is made of paint, thick, crusty paint that asserts with the utmost clarity the advantages of looking over theatre. I don't think there's an artist alive, and there hasn't been one since Picasso, who made the scrutiny of the naked human body such an unsettling business. The way Freud perceives a form and builds it up from oily mud on a piece of cloth, the way that he constructs analysed equivalents to reality is inspiring. The show at the Wallace Collection by this famously reclusive artist represented an order of experience quite different from the relatively weightless coming into sight of a photographic image or a silkscreen. Every inch of the surface has to be won, must be argued through, bears the traces of curiosity and inquisition, and above all takes nothing for granted and demands active engagement with the viewer as its right. Little or nothing of this kind happens with Warhol or Gilbert and George or any of the other image scavengers and recyclers who infest the stylish woods of an already decayed and pulped out postmodernism. Freud paints so slowly that when I see that half dried out pot plant, I wonder if it wasn't all green when he started the picture. But the thing that astounds me about this painting is the way that it juggles scale, the way that it juggles position. You would believe that the model was leaning backwards and would recede away from you, but his physical presence is so powerful that he also seems to tower over you. So there's this odd double effect, which is both very natural seeming and at the same time oddly dislocating. And there's a really intriguing kind of contrast that he's brought in between that rather massive and tense set of shapes that make up the body of the man and that sinuous, relaxed character of the dog, which is just an animal drifting off into unconsciousness. Not far from where Lucian Freud lives in London, there is a riding school, and in that school, one of the horses particularly caught Freud's eye. I mean, Freud has always been fascinated by horses because apart from anything else, he's been a big gambler on the GGs over the years of his life. And this particular horse, he once said to me, had this, it just felt so proud of its own backside. And Lucian thought, well, all right, we'll just paint the horse's ass. We won't bother about its head. Let's just do the backside of the horse. And he did. And I think the result is quite extraordinary with that, to me, amazing observation of the textures and the ripple of muscles under the skin and hair, all that goes into a painting of what to somebody else might be a rather anonymous kind of equine backside. Every few years, some twit in the art world hops up and sings a song about the death of painting. But what you take away from a show like this one is a triumphant vindication, actually, of painting's liveliness and its rights of claim. Painting is, you might say, exactly what mass visual media are not. A way of specific engagement, not of general seduction. That is its continuing relevance to us. Everywhere and at all times, there is a world to be reformed by the darting subtlety and persistent slowness of the painter's eye. There is beauty in pure paint confidently handled, and this of course does not need just to be figurative. It can be abstract too. We recognize a Mondrian grid as a defining image of the modern. A Rothko as the work of a man who believed in the spiritual possibilities of blurred fields of colour. Or a work by Ellsworth Kelly that creates an art of spare, authoritative and very refined forms. These are images of subtlety and beauty. A beauty which is still accessible to the abstract, and one of the most interesting artists working in abstraction today is Sean Scully. His work is contemplative, painterly. He wants to make art that everyone can understand. He does that by grounding his abstract painting in shared urban experience. Scully's are very New York paintings, yet the Manhattan they evoke is not the foreigner's grid of perfect plains, but rather the heavy, gritty, slap-together look of downtown, where Scully has his studio, the hoardings of warped plywood, the metal slabs patching the street. No one could take them for super graphics. Their mood is, above all, reflective. They aspire to a rough Doric calm.
You have these two polarities that started at the beginning of the 20th century. One is to make art like everything else, and one is to make art different from everything else and hold to its position as a kind of sanctuary. And that's the position that I hold to. And I'm trying to make something that's spiritually informed and powerful and so on. And they're opposing points of view. If you make art interactive, you make it like advertising, you make big photographs that look like billboards, etc., etc. They're very striking, but at a great cost, I believe. And that is the fact that art's in danger then of losing its soul, the thing that makes it different and it gives us a place to go to.
Scully's work is meditative and strangely confrontational. He wants to give the image the distinctness of a body, asserting itself against your gaze. The surfaces seem store-like, like stone. They're opaque, you can't see through them or even into them. Besides, the inlaid, locked-in forms of Scully's work prevent the eye from roaming too freely. Stray out of one box and you finish in another, not on a free horizon. Hence the density, the lack of spaces between things, which adds to the painting's gravity. It may look a little like architecture, but it's painting all the way through.
The way that a painting seems to work in the culture is very slowly and subliminally. It's almost dormant on the wall. You know, you can walk right by it and you can ignore it. But every time you come back to it, it lights up, it re-engages.
But it does this slowly and it does this, as you say, almost subliminally.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the way ivy crawls over a building. If you watch it, you can't see anything happening. You go away for 6 months and it's different.
This is not instant art. It takes years of concentration, years of looking and going in and out of fashion, still painting when faced with the twin poisons of either failure or success. Abstract painting often has to do with time, with depicting a place where time no longer applies, closer perhaps to music. It represents a search for harmony and grace, a place of timelessness and, to use a word which dropped out of fashion some time back, of beauty. 100 years ago, 75 years ago even, people used to talk about revolution as though it were the model of art. Art was supposed to be revolutionary. Art was going to produce, if you did it right, it was going to produce some kind of social change. I'm not at all sure that that was ever achieved, and if it was almost invisibly so. And today, I think we're left with a more modest but an equally difficult task for art to do, and that is to be beautiful, to manifest beauty. People need beauty. There's a hunger for it amid the clamour of visual imagery that surrounds us. And so we seek out zones of silence and contemplation, arenas for free thought and unregimented feeling. Museums have supplanted the church as places both of social congress and of civic pride. They are the new cathedrals, and despite the dubious quality of some of the stuff that actually goes in them, or even outside them, there's a growing hunger for the direct experience of art on a museum wall. A world away from the forest of media, work that is unique and obstinate in its individuality, whether it be by an Anselm Kiefer, a Paul Arago, a Lucian Freud, or a David Hockney. We're seeking value, looking for meaning, a place outside ourselves that tells us that there's more to life than our everyday concerns and needs. You could see this in the crowds gathering for Olafur Eliasson's weather project in the middle of the turbine hall of the Tate Modern. Hundreds of monofilament lamps that suppressed all colours except yellow, shedding a gold light through gloomy air thickened by fog machines underneath a mirrored ceiling. People lay on the floor, staring up at themselves reflected in that ceiling, lit by the pale yellow light of their new sun god. The success of the Weather Project, with its 2 million visitors, shows that the hunger for new art is as strong as ever. The idea that aesthetic experience provides a transcendent understanding is at the very heart of art. It fulfills a deep human need. And despite the decadence, the confusion, and the brouhaha, the desire to experience it, live with it, and learn from it remains immortal.